There are places you should never go, and rules you should never break, but you came here anyway. Welcome to Night Creepypasta Rules, the channel that dares to uncover the darkest codes of survival, hidden in stories people were never meant to hear. In tonight's video, we've gathered the most spine-chilling creepypasta rules of the week, each more disturbing than the last. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end. There's a twist, a warning, a price. So, before it's too late, comment below which rule haunted you the most, and subscribe if you're ready to play by their rules, because once you press play, you're already part of the story. Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules, where the deeper you dig, the more the rules start to make sense. Tonight's story follows a homicide detective in Cook County, chasing a killer unlike any he's faced before. The victims are random, the scenes are precise, and the blood, it writes back. This is, I'm a detective hunting a murderer in Cook County. We have 3 strange rules. Rule 1 for homicide in Cook County: the dead don't write messages. Rule 2, learned the hard way by predecessors whose names are only whispered in hushed tones after too many whiskeys. Sometimes, the blood does, and you don't read it. The stench hit first. Copper. Iron. The specific metallic tang of life, violently spilled, overlaid with cheap air freshener, and the lingering scent of fried onions from the apartment downstairs. Uptown. 3rd floor walk-up. Another Tuesday night bleeding into Wednesday morning in Chicago. My name's Koski, detective, homicide. Been doing this long enough to know most scenes by smell before I even cross the threshold. This one smelled different underneath the gore. Colder, sharper, like ozone before a strike. My partner, Detective Maya Sharma, was already inside, her tablet casting a cool blue light on her focused face as she scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who trusted data more than gut feelings. She was good, sharp, half my age, and hadn't yet developed the healthy layer of cynicism needed to survive this job without going mad. Or maybe she just hit it better. Standard entry wound, close range, she reported without looking up. Stylus dancing across the screen. No forced entry. Scene suggests struggle post-mortem. Oddly localized. I stepped further in, my gaze sweeping the small, cluttered living room. She was right. Most of the violence was contained, brutally so, to the victim slumped in an armchair. But the spatter, that was wrong. Not the usual chaotic arcs and drips on the wall behind the chair. Intricate patterns bloomed dark red against faded floral wallpaper. Lines, curves, almost geometric, too precise for random arterial spray. It looked less like the result of violence and more like calligraphy written in blood. A cold knot tightened in my gut. It reminded me of the Davison case years ago. My old partner, Jack. He got obsessed with patterns like this, ended up taking early retirement, moved somewhere quiet, never really talked right again. Left a cryptic note in the cold case file. 3 rules. Don't read. Don't answer. Don't run unless you hear your name. We all thought he'd cracked under the strain. Looking at the wall now, I wasn't so sure. Patterning looks off, Sharma, I said, keeping my voice level, professional. Like secondary transfer, maybe. Or deliberate marking. Or deliberate marking? She zoomed in on her tablet. High-velocity impact doesn't usually create symmetrical whorls like that, Lieutenant, she conceded, frowning slightly. Unless the surface underneath affected dispersal. I'll flag it for Chesu. She moved closer, tilting her head. Almost looks like script. Bag it, tag it, keep distance, I ordered, maybe too sharply. Possible biohazard contamination affecting analysis. Wide shots only for now. Rule 1, don't read, even if they weren't words yet. The intent felt there. The cold spot I suddenly noticed pooling near that specific wall reinforced the feeling. This wasn't just a murder scene. It felt like the opening sentence of a very bad story. Right, Sharma replied, brow furrowed at my tone, but already complying, stepping back, focusing her tablet elsewhere. I scanned the rest of the room, pushing down the unease, focusing on procedure, time of death estimation, preliminary canvas notes, waiting for the GSU text, the mundane, grim checklist of death in the city. But my eyes kept drifting back to the wall, to the impossible patterns blooming there, feeling less like a detective and more like an unwilling reader standing before a forbidden text. The low hum of the apartment building's ancient wiring seemed to deepen slightly whenever I looked that way, a faint, almost questioning electrical sigh in the otherwise quiet room. Just the building settling, I told myself. Just bad wiring, but the chill remained. The initial investigation yielded frustratingly little. Victim was a mid-level accountant. Quiet life, no known enemies. Neighbors heard nothing. Forensics came back standard mostly. Cause of death was clear. Weapon likely a heavy blade. No prints beyond the victims. But the blood patterns. JSU logged them as anomalous, non-conclusive. Unable to replicate the intricate whorls through known physics. Yankowski hadn't pushed them, citing biohazard degradation concerns based on my initial assessment. My deliberate obstruction. The symbol found near the body. A small, asymmetric sigil carved crudely into the floorboards beneath the armchair. Was more concrete. Sharma ran it through every database, historical and fringe. Nothing. Nothing, just geometric shapes that felt wrong. It feels almost familiar, like something I've seen in research for other projects, I admitted reluctantly during a late-night session in my cramped office, the city lights painting stripes across the dusty floor. I decided consulting an expert was necessary, justifying it as exploring potential ritualistic elements. My old contact from the Davison case, Jack's contact initially, was Dr. Aris Thorne, a semi-retired historian at the University of Chicago, specializing in esoteric belief systems and fringe folklore, particularly local Chicago history, a man who knew too much about the city's shadowed corners. Thorne agreed to see me, his voice dry and cautious over the phone. His office was a chaotic sanctuary of piled books and arcane artifacts, smelling of old paper, pipe tobacco, and something else. Maybe formaldehyde from anatomical charts, or just dust. The described sound of brittle pages turning as he searched his references was the only noise for several minutes. I showed him the photo of the floor carving, carefully cropping out the blood patterns on the wall from other scene photos I described verbally. He peered at the carving through thick spectacles. Ah, he murmured, a soft exhalation of breath. The clavius knot. Not common. Associated with problematic circles in the early 20th century here. Gators of the Crimson Quill, they called themselves. Believed they could attain knowledge, power even, by encoding intent into visceral mediums. Visceral mediums? I asked, a cold feeling spreading through me. Blood, Thorne stated simply, looking up at me over his glasses, his eyes sharp. Among other things, they believed intense emotion, particularly at the moment of death, created a unique energetic residue that could be shaped, scripted, to carry specific meaning or power. Dangerous, unstable work. Most practitioners vanished or met unpleasant ends. He pushed a brittle, leather-bound book towards me, open to a page showing variations of the knot. They sought forbidden knowledge, detective, keys to other interpretations of reality. Be exceedingly careful. Reading such script, if you encounter it, is said to invite the knowledge and its consequences directly into the reader's mind. His warning echoed Rule 1 with chilling precision. Leaving Thorne's office, the gritty Chicago wind whipping around me felt less real than the academic horror had described. Blood script. Infectious knowledge. 2 days later, we got the call. Another one. Different neighborhood, decaying industrial area near the Calumet River this time. Inside a vast, echoing, abandoned warehouse. Same Mo's single victim, exsanguinated, minimal struggle, and the wall. Sharma saw it first this time, her sharp intake of breath audible even from the doorway. I followed her gaze. There, illuminated by our flashlight beams against the grimy brickwork, stretching easily 10 feet high, was the message. Not just patterns this time. Clear, distinct words formed from thick, drying blood, written in an archaic, spidery script that seemed simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. Rule 1. If the blood patterns form words, don't read them. What? Kovsky, Sharma whispered, raising her tablet to photograph it. No, I snapped, grabbing her arm, physically pulling her back, turning her away. Don't look directly. Don't photograph. Scene contamination. The excuse sounded flimsy even to me, but the panic was real. What? Lieutenant, it's evidence, she protested, trying to pull free. It's a compromised pattern, I insisted, keeping my own eyes averted, focusing on a patch of blank wall beside it. Unstable medium. CSU protocol is wide-angle context only until specialist assessment. I was making it up, but needed to stop her reading it. Stop myself reading it. The air near the wall felt heavy, vibrating, a low humming resonance almost identical to the one near the corner in Elias Vance's cell. Focus, Kowski, wrong case. A low humming resonance that made my temples throb. I felt a wave of intense nausea, physical impact. Specialist, Sharma asked, confused but lowering her tablet. Since when? Since now, I said grimly. My orders, secure the perimeter. Keep everyone back from this wall until CSU gets here with proper containment gear. She hesitated, then nodded, clearly disturbed by my intensity, but obeying the direct order. As she moved away, calling it in, I risked the briefest sideways glance. The words seemed to writhe, to shift, almost forming shapes I recognized before I forced my eyes away, the headache intensifying blindingly for a moment. I backed out of the immediate area, the unread message burning like acid behind my averted eyes. The killer wasn't just killing. He was writing, and his ink was poison. The blood script from the warehouse scene became the focal point. The terrifying elephant in the evidence room. CSU documented it cautiously, using wide-angle shots and LiDAR scanning, avoiding direct visual confirmation per my increasingly strained contamination protocol insistence. The official report listed unidentified symbolic writing, medium consistent with victim's blood. Privately, I sent the blurred pattern captures to Dr. Thorne. His response was immediate, urgent, an encrypted email, no phone call. Detective Kovsky. The script structure is consistent with late Renaissance occult ciphers, but the glyphs themselves are non-standard, potentially channeled or auto-generated by the ritual process itself. Intent appears informational transmissive. Proximity alone carries risk of psychic transference. Reading it as warned would likely implant the core messages or consciousness fragment directly. Avoidance is the only safe protocol. Suspect killer believes they are accessing or transmitting forbidden knowledge. Nature of knowledge unknown. Likely dangerous, destabilizing. Recommend extreme caution. Investigation into killer's library research materials paramount. Psychic transference. Implant the message. Rule 1 wasn't just superstition. It was a firewall against mental infection. The investigation stalled. The killer was meticulous, leaving no forensic evidence beyond the ritualistic tableau and the blood script. No witnesses. Victims seemed random. Different ages, genders, backgrounds. The only connection was the method, the symbols, and the growing sense of purpose behind the killings. Pressure from upstairs mounted. Media started sniffing around the blood glyph killer. Sharma grew increasingly frustrated with my evasiveness, my insistence on protocols that weren't in the manual. Kowski, you're holding something back. She confronted me one evening, working late under the precinct's buzzing fluorescent lights. We were staring at crime scene layouts spread across a large table. That wall writing. You won't let me analyze the close-ups. You barely look at the wide shots yourself. What did Thorne really tell you? What aren't you telling me? Her voice held an edge of suspicion, hurt. Nuanced dialogue. I hesitated. How much could I reveal without sounding insane? Without violating Rule Delta? Wrong rule set. Without violating the unspoken rule of keeping this madness contained. It's complicated, Sharma. I hedged. Thorne believes the script itself could be psychologically harmful to decipher directly. A form of cognitive hazard. Cognitive hazard? Like a cult manifesto designed to mess with investigators. She scoffed, though her eyes held uncertainty. Or like something else? Before I could answer. Before I could decide how much to trust her with. Rule 2 happened. I was staring intently at the map, trying to see a geographic pattern in the kill locations. A question forming silently in my mind. Why these specific spots? Is there a ley line connection? An older energy? Suddenly, Sharma, who was supposedly reviewing autopsy reports across the table, spoke aloud, her voice quiet but clear, answering my unspoken thought. Maybe it's not ley lines, she mused, tapping her pen on a report. Maybe it's tied to the old water infrastructure. Thorne mentioned early Chicago had weird tunnels near some of these locations. I froze. My blood turned to ice. She had answered a question I hadn't asked, answered a thought I hadn't verbalized. Rule 2. If your partner answers a question you never asked, go home. Immediately. The air in the incident room felt suddenly thick, cold. I looked sharply at Sharma. She looked up, met my gaze, then blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Sorry, she mumbled, looking back at her report. Lost my train of thought. What were we saying? She seemed completely unaware of what she'd just done, of the boundary she'd crossed. But it had crossed it. The killer's influence, his growing psychic reach had just brushed against my partner's mind, used her as a momentary conduit. The danger wasn't just at the scenes anymore. It was here, potentially between us. Nothing, I said abruptly, standing up, grabbing my coat, my voice harsher than intended. We're done for tonight. Clocking out. Go home, Sharma. What? Kowski. It's barely 9. We were making progress. Now, I repeated, cutting her off, masking my terror with gruff authority. Go home. Get some rest. Fresh eyes tomorrow. I didn't wait for her reply. Just turned and walked out, ignoring her confused, hurt expression. Outside, the cool Chicago night air hit me, but did little to quell the fear churning inside. I drove home numbly, checking my mirrors constantly, the city lights feeling less like civilization and more like the scattered campfires of a besieged outpost. Rule 2 wasn't just a warning. It was an evacuation order. The killer's influence was spreading, and it was getting closer. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with swirling blood script I couldn't quite read, echoing whispers, and the chilling feeling of Sharma's voice, speaking thoughts that weren't hers. I returned to the precinct the next day hollow-eyed, running on caffeine and dread. Sharma was understandably cool, demanding an explanation for my abrupt departure. I couldn't give her the real one. I mumbled something about hitting a wall, stress, needing a break. She didn't buy it. The rift between us widening, the isolation intensified. Now even my partner felt like a potential vector, developed supporting character conflict, driven by a new urgency. I met with Thorne again, this time off campus, at a quiet cafe far from the university. I told him about Sharma answering my thought. His already serious expression darkened further. Rule 2, manifestation, he confirmed grimly. It signifies the killer's psychic reach is expanding, actively probing for receptive minds connected to the investigation. Your partner was momentarily susceptible. The go-home protocol is crucial. It breaks the immediate connection, removes potential targets from the contaminated zone before the influence can solidify or escalate into direct attack. He leaned closer. Detective, this is accelerating faster than I anticipated. The rituals are empowering him. We need to identify his final target location and time. Our research became frantic, cross-referencing the killer symbols, Thorne's occult texts, Chicago historical maps, ley line theories, dates of previous kills. A pattern finally emerged. 3 kills, forming points of a triangle. The blood scripts, Thorne theorized without reading them directly, likely contained coordinates or astronomical data pointing towards the triangle's center, and a specific date, the upcoming lunar eclipse, just 3 nights away. The center point, Graceland Cemetery. Specifically, near the old, eternally dark monument known as Eternal Silence. A powerful nexus, Thorne murmured, looking disturbed. Site of numerous strange occurrences over the years. He intends to complete his ritual there, using the eclipse's energy, amplified by the triangle of previous kills. He looked at me. He will expect you, detective. He knows you're hunting him. He might even want you there as the final witness the night before the eclipse. I was working late, alone in the incident room, going over the Graceland Cemetery maps, planning tactical approaches. Thorne's potential counter-ritual notes spread across the table. Head reluctantly provided a theoretical, unbinding phrase based on the script structure, warning it was incredibly dangerous. My personal burner phone, the one I used for sensitive sys, suddenly rang. Unknown number. My heart leaped. This wasn't the precinct line. This was mine. Hesitantly, I answered. Silence. Then, a low chuckle, electronically distorted but filled with chilling amusement. Getting close, detective, the voice rasped. Almost time for the final lesson. Hope you've been studying. It was him, the killer. Who is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to signal Sharma in the next room to start a trace. Oh, you know me, a voice chuckled again. We go way back to scraped knees on the playground, back to hiding under the porch during thunderstorms. A pause, then the words that turned my blood to ice. Still afraid of the dark, Skippy. Skippy, my childhood nickname, used only by my older brother, dead 20 years. A name buried deep, never spoken, never written in any official file. He knew. Rule 3. If the murderer calls you by your childhood nickname, run. Primal terror obliterated procedure. I didn't hang up. Didn't think. I dropped the phone as if it were white hot, kicked back my chair, and bolted out of the incident room, down the echoing precinct hallway, past surprised officers, not stopping until I burst out through the main doors onto the cold, rain-slicked Chicago street, gasping for air under the indifferent glow of the streetlights. The sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding heart filled my ears. I leaned against a brick wall, shaking uncontrollably. He knew my nickname. He had burrowed deep into my past, into my mind. The final boundary was breached. The hunt wasn't just professional anymore. It was intimately, terrifyingly personal. And the final confrontation at Graceland Cemetery felt suddenly, horribly inevitable. Rule 3 said run, but I knew, deep down, there was nowhere left to run to. Tomorrow night, I had to face him. The air in Graceland Cemetery crackled, thick with the unnatural energy of the lunar eclipse and the killer's ritual. Before the eternal silence statue, The blood script glistened wetly on the stone, seeming to writhe in the distorted silvery light. The killer, face indistinct but eyes blazing with fanaticism, stood with arms raised, his chanting, a low, guttural invocation, filled with harsh consonants and sibilant whispers, reaching a fever pitch. The swirling vortex of darkness beneath the statue's hood pulsed, deepening, promising something dreadful. "Sharma now!" I yelled, breaking the spell of Rule 3's terror that still clawed at me from the killer's use of Skippy. We moved, flanking the ritual site, weapons drawn, predictable. The killer hissed without turning, the voice still carrying that distorted, layered quality. The mundane response. He gestured towards the blood script near my feet. "Read it, detective. Understand the futility, the power being summoned. Rule 1. Eyes on him, Sharma." I shouted, forcing my gaze away from the glistening words, focusing only on the killer's silhouette. My head throbbed instantly, a sharp spike of pain behind my eyes from the near exposure. The killer laughed, a dry, rattling sound that scraped the unnatural quiet, still following those quaint little rules. "They won't save you when the gate opens." He turned slowly, holding a wickedly curved obsidian knife, its surface seeming to drink the already dim light. "Your partner, though? Perhaps she's more receptive." He looked directly at Sharma. I saw her tense beside me. "Detective Sharma." The killer's voice became smooth, reasonable, almost hypnotic. "Your lieutenant suspects you. He keeps secrets. He led his last partner to ruin. Wouldn't you like to know the real truth about that Davison case?" Sharma flinched, eyes widening almost imperceptibly. I saw the flicker of doubt, the hook expertly planted. "Sharma, don't listen!" I barked. "Police! Drop the weapon!" But she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, her focus momentarily broken. And in that instant, the killer's influence slid in. He failed him. Sharma whispered, her voice sounding distant, echoing slightly, her eyes unfocused, looking past me. "He just watched. Rule 2. She was compromised. Sharma." I yelled again, moving towards her, but the killer acted first. He slashed downwards with the obsidian knife, not at us, but across the blood script on the ground. A violent tearing sound, like reality itself ripping, erupted from the script. The ground beneath the eternal silent statue seemed to buckle. The vortex of darkness under the statue's hood surged outwards, expanding, extinguishing the flickering candles, plunging the clearing into absolute bone-chilling darkness, far deeper than the eclipse accounted for. A wave of intense cold and psychic pressure slammed into me, stealing my breath, filled with a cacophony of terrified whispers. My flashlight beam, when I clicked it back on frantically, cut only feet into the oppressive gloom. Sharma had stumbled back, shaking her head, eyes clearing but wide with terror. The killer stood near the statue, laughing, bathed in a faint internal luminescence emanating from the swirling darkness, which now seemed to writhe with indistinct shapes. "Too late, Skippy," the killer gloated, his voice merging with the whispers. "The gate is open. The knowledge flows. You cannot stop." I didn't let him finish, remembering Thorne's desperate, last-minute advice. The counter-ritual based on disrupting the narrative the killer sought to impose. I raised my voice, projecting calm I didn't feel, reciting the archaic phrase Thorne had found. A linguistic phrase Thorne had found. Paradox designed to unravel such incantations. Veritas non dicta, silentium non fractum, speculum non reflectans. I shouted the meaningless Latin into the swirling dark, focusing my intent, my will, against the chaos. The killer staggered back as if struck. The swirling darkness around the statue flickered violently. The whispers faltered, replaced by a high-pitched screeching sound, like feedback or tearing metal. "What?" the killer gasped, his confidence shattering. "No, that's not part of the text. Making a new entry. I yelled back, simultaneously signaling Sharma, who, understanding dawning in her eyes, raised her weapon. While the killer's momentarily disoriented, distracted by the counter-phrase disrupting his connection, Sharma fired. Not at him, but at the base of the Eternal Silence statue, where the blood script still pulsed faintly. The loud report of her service weapon echoed, followed by the sharp ping and ricochet of bullets against the ancient stone. The effect was explosive. The swirling darkness imploded with a deafening rush of displaced air, and a final, despairing electronic wail. The statue base cracked. The blood script flared brightly, then vanished, leaving only scorched stone. The killer screamed, clutching his head, dropping the obsidian knife as the unnatural light faded from his eyes, leaving him just a man, blinking in the sudden return of the dim eclipse-lit clearing. He collapsed, unconscious or worse. The intense cold dissipated. The whispers ceased. The only sounds were the wind, Sharma's ragged breathing, and the distant sirens finally growing closer. The ritual was broken. The killer stopped. We were alive. The arrival of uniformed officers and GSU techs felt like stepping from a nightmare back into a badly lit procedural drama. The clearing around the Eternal Silence statue was suddenly flooded with harsh flashlight beams and the mundane crackle of police radios. Explaining the scene was challenging. The unconscious killer, identified later as a missing university librarian named Arthur Penn, was secured. The cracked statue base, the scorch marks where the blood script had been, the scattered ritual paraphernalia, they were documented, photographed, bagged. Sharma and I gave our statements separately, sticking to the agreed narrative. Tracked Penn here based on evidence, interrupted a likely ritualistic precursor to another act. Suspect resisted violently, non-lethal force, the gunshots impacting the statue base, causing him to lose footing and strike his head. Used to subdue him. No mention of blood words, psychic influence, partners answering unasked questions, or childhood nicknames. Just a dangerous delusional offender stopped through standard police work. It felt thin, dishonest but necessary. Kowski, my old partner Jack's ghost seemed to whisper, would have approved of the clean paperwork. Lighter, cleaned up, adrenaline replaced by bone-deep exhaustion, and trembling hands. Sharma and I sat in near silence in my car, answering your thought, him knowing your name. She finally whispered, staring out at the rainy Chicago streets. That was real, wasn't it? All of it? Yeah, I said quietly. It was real. There was no point denying it to her now. We were bound by the shared experience, a shared secret. Her sharp mind, her tech skills had been vital. Her presence, though initially targeted, had ultimately helped break the killer's focus. The rules, she murmured. They actually worked. Most of them. I corrected. Rule 3. Running wasn't an option in the end. Confrontation had been necessary. We met with Dr. Thorne the next day in his dusty university office. He listened intently as I recounted the final confrontation, including the blood words, Sharma being influenced, the nickname, and crucially, the counterphrase I'd used. Thorne nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Ah, he said, the liar's paradox recitation. An old obscure technique hypothesized to disrupt rituals based on achieving objective truth or knowledge through subjective sacrifice. By introducing a fundamental logical contradiction during the peak energy phase, you essentially crashed his system, severed his connection to whatever power he was tapping. He looked grim, dangerous, could have backfired catastrophically, pulled you into the paradox. He examined me closely, but you resisted the psychic intrusion beforehand, the nickname, and you didn't read the blood script. That likely preserved your cognitive integrity enough for the counter-ritual to work without consuming you. He confirmed the blood words were likely infectious memes or direct psychic commands. Rule 2 was a sign of temporary psychic vulnerability in the partner. signaling imminent danger to the primary target, me. Rule 3 was the indicator of deep personal connection, making escape the only safe option, which I had been forced to override. "You've done more than just catch a killer, Detective," Thorne said quietly, packing his pipe. "You've contained something that used him as a vessel." But he lit the pipe. The flame casting flickering shadows, the kind of knowledge he was tapping into. The forces behind those rituals, they don't just disappear. And your direct exposure, your resistance, it leaves a mark. You'll be more attuned now to similar patterns, similar energies. He puffed thoughtfully. "Consider it an occupational hazard with no disability clause." The weight of his words settled on me. I hadn't just closed a case. I'd opened a door in my own perception. The city outside Thorne's window felt different now. Its familiar grid overlaid with potential patterns, hidden frequencies. My past failure, Jack's descent. It felt less like isolated tragedy and more like part of a larger, darker tapestry I was now irrevocably woven into. Sharma, beside me, remained silent, absorbing the implications. Our partnership had just been redefined. Months later, Chicago settled back into its familiar rhythms, or seemed to. The Blood Glyph killer case was officially closed. Arthur Penn declared criminally insane, confined indefinitely to a secure psychiatric facility. Not Ridgewater, thankfully. His ritualistic motives dismissed as psychotic delusion in the final report I co-signed with Sharma. The blood script photos were filed away, marked inconclusive. The rules remained unspoken precinct lore, perhaps whispered to the next unlucky detective assigned a case that felt wrong. But for me, things were different. Thorne was right. The exposure left a mark. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly. It was a heightened awareness, a subtle shift in perception. I noticed things I would have dismissed before. Strange graffiti hacks that mirrored occult symbols Thorne had shown me. Cold spots lingering in specific alleyways or rooms long after GSU had left. The described quality of silence in certain pre-dawn hours that felt unnervingly like the charged quiet at Graceland. My work changed. Hemlock, my captain now. Assuming previous Warden Hemlock name Royce was okay, adjusting context, seemed to notice the shift in me after the Penn case debrief. He started quietly routing certain files my way. Cold cases with unexplained elements, new homicides with subtle ritualistic undertones, missing persons last seen near locations Thorne had identified as potentially significant. No explicit instructions, just the files appearing on my desk, an unspoken understanding passing between us. He knew I saw things differently now. Sharma became my permanent partner by a mutual request. The shared experience forged an unbreakable, if often silent, bond. She handled the tech, the data, the procedural groundwork. I handled the other aspects, reading between the lines, noticing the patterns, applying Thorne's research, and my own hard-won instincts. We became a strange, effective team, navigating the city's darkness on two levels simultaneously. I developed my own protocols, extensions of the original 3 rules, guided by Thorne's occasional cryptic advice via encrypted email, learning to recognize the feeling that preceded a Rule 2 psychic bleed over in a witness or partner, developing grounding techniques to resist the pull of a Rule 3 personal attack, buying precious seconds, learning which symbols, which materials, like that simple iron charm, offered minor shielding against residual psychic energy. It wasn't magic. It felt more like applied cognitive defense against hazardous information. Tonight, we stand at another crime scene. A dilapidated apartment building west of the Loop. The scene is messy, conventional on the surface, likely gang-related. But something feels off. The air is too cold. The described sound of dripping water from the floor above forms an unnervingly regular rhythm, and on the wall, mostly obscured by furniture but visible if you know where to look, is a faint residue pattern, almost like faded blood, vaguely resembling an archaic symbol Thorn had shown me. Sharma catches my eye, a silent question. I give a slight nod. I see it too. While the uniformed officers secure the scene, I take out my private logbook, the one separate from official case files. Make a note, location, time, symbol type gamma-3 variant, possible low-level residual resonance. Another data point for the files Thorn and I now secretly compile. Another piece in the larger puzzle of the city's hidden currents. Later, heading back to the car, Sharma speaks, her voice low. Think this one's like the pen case. Maybe, I reply, glancing back at the dark apartment building. Too early to tell. But we watch it, carefully. We get into the cruiser. The radio crackles to life with standard dispatch chatter. Normal sounds. Normal city. But I listen underneath the noise now. Always listening for the static, the whispers, the echoes. The final sound isn't a dramatic reveal or a chilling threat. It's just a soft, steady click of my pen as I close my private logbook, tucking it away. The detective who survived by learning the rules, now bound by the burden of knowledge to keep watching the shadows, forever listening for the blood that them sometimes speaks. The work goes on. He followed the rules. Don't read the script. Don't answer the voice. Run if it says your name. But some knowledge doesn't fade. It latches on. Now, even after closing the case, he's still watching the walls, still hearing the static, still flipping through pages that were never meant to be read. If this story left a mark on you, like, share, and subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. We'll be back soon with another story that was never supposed to be told. Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight's story takes us into the long, dark halls of Northgate High, where the night janitor follows 3 strange rules left behind by his predecessor. Don't look into the lit classroom. Wave. But don't speak. And whatever you do, if the bell rings at 3:17 a.m., run. But some echoes don't stay quiet. And tonight, someone must decide if he'll clean the building or save its soul. This is... I'm a janitor at a high school in Ohio. We have 3 rules to survive. The checklist they give the night janitor at Northgate High covers floors, trash, and locks. The list the last guy left's that turn on alone. Students who aren't there. And why you run like hell if the bell rings at 3:17 a.m. My name's Frank Kowalski. For 3 years now, 5 nights a week, this old brick behemoth in northeastern Ohio has been my domain after the last bell rings, and the echoes of teenage chaos fade into something else, something quieter, heavier. Came here after the steel mill downstate. Finally gave up the ghost, taking 30 years of my life with it. Needed steady work. Something quiet where I could just put my head down, push a buffer, and not think too much about empty chairs at the kitchen table. Northgate High offered quiet. All right, maybe too much of it. The place breathes differently after dark. During the day, it's noise and movement. At night, the silence settles thick as century-old dust in the rafters. You hear everything. The low, resonant hum of the ancient boiler in the sub-basement, vibrating faintly through the concrete. The sigh and occasional shudder of the ventilation system, circulating air thick with the scent of industrial floor wax, disinfectant, chalk dust, and something indefinably older, like stale memories trapped in the plaster. My own footsteps, muffled by worn rubber soles, echo too loudly down the long, polished corridors, lit only by the intermittent flickering, buzzing security lights that cast more shadows than illumination. Tonight feels heavier than usual. A damp chill seeps in, unusual for early fall, carrying the scent of rain and decaying leaves from the woods, pressing close against the school's north wing. I start my rounds on the first floor, pushing the squeaking utility cart ahead of me, the distinct rhythmic slosh of water in the mop bucket, is a familiar counterpoint to the building's quiet size. Passing the main office wing, I see a light still on in one classroom. Sarah Jenkins, the young English teacher, dedicated, often stays late grading. I pause, see her silhouette bent over papers at her desk. We exchange brief waves sometimes, small islands of normalcy in the vast emptiness. Tonight, her light feels reassuring, a small defiance against the encroaching dark. Principal Thorne's office further down is predictably dark. Her memos about energy conservation are legendary. I reach the main janitor's closet near the gymnasium, a cramped space smelling strongly of ammonia and damp rags. Tucked behind a rusty pipe, almost hidden, is the laminated card old Henderson left behind before he retired so abruptly last spring. Health reasons, Thorne had said curtly. Henderson looked fine when I saw him buying beer later that week, but his eyes had held a haunted, jittery look I recognized from my mill days. The look of a man who'd seen the gears up close and knew they could take a finger, or worse. I know the card by heart now, but sometimes I still pull it out, reading the blocky handwritten words under my flashlight beam. Northgate night shift, Phi I-1. Lights on, eyes off. Classroom lights come on by themselves down an empty hall. Keep walking. Don't peek inside. Not your circuit to fix, my thought. Faulty wiring, or something using the wiring. 2. The waving kid. See a student after hours you don't recognize? If they wave, just give a nod or wave back brief. Don't talk to them. They ain't looking for detention, I thought. Prankster, or the echoes old Mrs. Gable, the retired librarian, used to whisper about. 3. The 3:17 bell. Hear the main school bell ring clear at 3:17 a.m. Not a short circuit, not a test. Drop everything. Exit the building immediately via nearest door. Wait outside till 3:20 a.m. Then go back, I thought. This one feels different. Too specific. Too absolute. What happens between 3:17 and 3:20 sounds like pure hogwash. The kind of ghost stories you tell to scare the new guy. But after 3 years of nights here, you learn the building has habits. You learn which stairwell always feels colder, which hallway makes the hair on your arms stand up. You learn to trust the warnings, even the crazy ones, especially the crazy ones. My past taught me the high cost of ignoring procedure, of freezing when action was needed. Here, the procedure is the action, even if that action is deliberate ignorance or sudden flight. I tuck the card away, grab a fresh mop head. Back in the main corridor, heading towards the older north wing, I hear it. A faint but distinct metallic rattling, like multiple small locker doors vibrating gently, echoing from far down the darkened hallway. I stop, listening intently. The sound fades. Just the building settling, I tell myself, gripping the mop handle tighter. Old building, lots of settling. Further down, near the library entrance, the overhead lights pulse erratically for several seconds. A slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening, before stabilizing again with a louder than usual electrical hum. My eyes scan the shadows. Nothing seems out of place. Reaching the end of the hall near the gymnasium entrance, my foot nudges something on the floor. I shine my flashlight down. A single sheet of drawing paper, escaped from the art room perhaps. Crayons, childishly rendered. It depicts the school's bell tower, tall and imposing. But drawn across the bell itself is a crude, jagged crack, colored in angry red. I pick it up, intending to throw it away, then pause. A shiver, cold and unrelated to the drafty hallway, traces its way down my spine. I crumple the drawing, shove it deep into my cart's trash receptacle, and push onward into the vast, echoing quiet of the school night. The rules feel heavier tonight. The silence feels like it's listening more intently. And 3:17 a.m. feels a long, long way off. The silence after the lights in 11B snapped off felt heavy, judgmental. I finished buffing the main hallway floor, the buffers drone unnervingly loud in the wake of the anomaly. My mind raced, trying to fit the event into a logical box. Faulty ballast, timer glitch, motion sensor malfunction, triggered by, and Rule 1 felt less like superstition now, more like a necessary if baffling safety protocol. My days off became consumed by Northgate High, albeit remotely. I found myself at the small-town library, ignoring the curious glances of Martha, the librarian. As I trolled through microfiche archives of the Havenwood Gazette and brittle school board minutes, Zara Jenkins, the English teacher, proved an invaluable, if initially unwitting, research assistant. I'd mentioned my interest in the school's long history, and she passionate about local lore. Enthusiastically dug up digitized yearbooks and alumni newsletters. Room 11D, I learned, had indeed belonged to Mr. Abernathy, the popular history teacher who died suddenly in the mid-70s. Officially, a heart attack. Unofficially, Sarah found archived student newspaper articles from the time mentioning Abernathy had become withdrawn. Obsessed, complaining about flickering lights and whispers in the walls of his classroom in the weeks leading up to his death. One article quoted a student, saying Abernathy claimed the room held memories too strongly. The student disappearance from the late 90s was harder to pin down. Daniel Miller, talented musician, gifted artist, but increasingly troubled, according to counselor notes Sarah managed to partially access. He spent hours alone in the music wing practice rooms, adjacent to 11B. Vanished without a trace one rainy October night. His locker contained only cryptic drawings and song lyrics about hearing the wrong bell in the quiet place behind the music. No official explanation was ever found. Back on shift, the knowledge added layers of dread to my routine. The school felt less empty, more populated by lingering questions and potential echoes. One rainy evening, Sarah stayed late again, grading papers. As I emptied her trash, she looked up, her expression weary but friendly. "Find any interesting history, Frank?" she asked, rubbing her temples. "This place gives me a headache sometimes. The lighting, I think." "Just old building stories," I said noncommittally. "You ever notice anything odd, working late?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "It sounds stupid," she admitted quietly, "but sometimes I feel like I see movement out of the corner of my eye down the hall, like a student walking past. But when I look, there's no one there." She forced a laugh. "Just tired eyes and too many essays, right?" My blood ran cold. Rule 2. See a student after hours you don't recognize. Had she seen Daniel Miller's echo? Probably just shadows, I said, keeping my voice even. Place plays tricks. But her casual comment felt like another confirmation. Later that night, patrolling the second floor near the art rooms, I saw it myself. Standing at the far end of the long, dimly lit corridor, leaning against a bank of lockers, was a figure. Indistinct in the shadows, but undeniably shaped like a high school student, maybe wearing a hoodie. They were perfectly still. My heart hammered. Was this it? Was it Daniel? Or just a trick of the light? My own research fueling paranoia. I gripped my mop handle tighter, took a tentative step forward. "Hey!" I called out, voice raspy. "School's closed." The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted a hand. A small, hesitant wave. Rule 2. Wave back, but don't speak. My own hand felt heavy, disconnected. But I forced it up, gave a quick, jerky wave in return. My throat tight. I didn't speak, didn't move closer. Just stood there, 50 yards away, acknowledging the impossible figure. An intense wave of cold, far colder than the ambient hallway temperature, washed over me, carrying with it a profound sense of melancholy, of youthful despair so thick it almost choked me. It felt like standing too close to an open grave. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure faded. Not walked away, but dissolved, melting back into the deep shadows by the lockers until nothing remained. I stood there for a long time, breathing heavily, the unnatural cold slowly receding, leaving only the normal chill of the old building and the lingering echo of that profound sadness. It wasn't just a ghost, it felt like a memory, trapped, replaying itself. Sarah hadn't been seeing things. Rule 2 wasn't about pranksters. It was about acknowledging grief without engaging the source directly. What happened if you did speak? Did you get drawn into the echo? Shaken, I continued my rounds, the school feeling heavier, sadder, more dangerous than ever. The waving echo became a semi-regular occurrence over the next few weeks. Always the same spot, second floor, near the art rooms and lockers. Always silent, always waving hesitantly, always fading after I performed the strange, silent ritual of waving back. Each time, it left me with that same lingering chill, that same wave of profound melancholy. I learned to anticipate it, to perform the wave almost automatically. A grim check-in with the school's resident sorrow. Zara Jenkins saw it too, one night when we were leaving together, after she'd stayed exceptionally late for parent-teacher consultations. She gasped, grabbing my arm, pointing towards the end of the hall where the figure stood silhouetted against the exit light. "Frank, did you see that?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just wave back, Sarah. Don't say anything." She looked at me, then at the figure, then hesitantly raised her hand. The figure faded. Sarah stared at the empty space, pale and trembling. What was that? About the rules, about Henderson, about the lights in 11B, about my research into Daniel Miller, the vanished musician. She listened in stunned silence, her initial skepticism dissolving into wide-eyed fear and dawning understanding. "The bell," she breathed, connecting the dots. Daniel's note mentioned the bell. 3:17. "I know," I said grimly, "and the anniversary of his disappearance is coming up." From then on, Sarah became my cautious ally. She used her daytime access to dig deeper, finding archived school newspapers with more details about Daniel. His talent, his increasing isolation, rumors he was hearing things. Obsessed with the school's old bell tower. She found maintenance requests from that era complaining about the bell system, acting erratically, specifically ringing off schedule in the early morning hours. And she found one chilling account from a former teacher, long retired, mentioning Daniel had claimed the 3:17 a.m. bell sang a song only he could hear, and that it wanted him to be quiet. The logic, twisted as it was, began to form. The building held the echo of Daniel's trauma, inextricably linked to the bell at 3:17 a.m. Rule 1, Light's classroom, might be witnessing residual moments of his solitary practice or despair. Rule 2, waving student, was encountering his primary echo directly. And Rule 3, the bell, was the peak manifestation, the replay of the event itself, demanding evacuation. Principal Thorne remained a wall of institutional denial. When I presented Sarah's findings about the historical bell malfunctions and the 317 connection, carefully omitting the spectral student, Thorne dismissed it curtly. Old wiring, Mr. Kowalski. Scheduled for upgrade next fiscal year, maybe. Ensure doors are locked. Her willful ignorance felt dangerous. As the anniversary of Daniel's disappearance approached, the atmosphere in the school grew palpably heavier. The subtle anomalies intensified. The described sounds of locker doors rattling became more frequent, more widespread. Faint, discordant piano notes, described sound, sometimes drifted from the locked music wing late at night. Cold spots felt larger, lingering longer. I started finding more of those strange drawings. The cracked bell, tucked into textbooks, left on cafeteria tables. Then came the warning. I was buffing the floors in the main entrance hall, the large clock above the office doors reading 2:55 a.m. 5 nights before the anniversary. The school was utterly silent. The buffer switched off while I reapplied wax. A single sharp metallic clang echoed through the building. I froze, every muscle tensing. The school bell. Once, just like Daniel's note implied it might start. Heart pounding. I grabbed my keys, ready to bolt for the nearest exit. Rule 3 flashing in my mind, but silence followed. No second chime, no frantic continuous ringing, just the heavy silence settling back, perhaps even deeper than before. A test? A precursor? A reminder that the anniversary was coming? That the 3/17 event was drawing closer? I didn't wait to find out. I left the buffer, gathered my things, and walked quickly, purposefully, towards the main doors, my footsteps echoing too loudly. I needed to be outside, away from the listening silence, before the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour. The single chime felt like the first tremor before the earthquake. The week leading up to the anniversary of Daniel Miller's disappearance was the longest of my life. Each night shift at Northgate High felt like walking into a pressure cooker, the silence thick with anticipation, the building seeming to hold its breath. The single premature bell chime had been the overture. Now the smaller anomalies intensified daily. Lights flickered constantly, old corridors plunging into darkness, then flaring back. The described sounds of movement were incessant. Chairs scraping across floors in empty classrooms above me. Lockers rattling violently down deserted hallways. Faint, distorted piano music drifting from the sealed music wing at all hours. The waving echo of Daniel appeared almost every night now. Sometimes in multiple places at once. His form less translucent, more defined. His expression increasingly desperate. I performed the silent wave, Rule 2. But the feeling of sorrow it imparted was becoming almost unbearable. Zara, bless her brave heart, insisted on staying late with me each night leading up to the anniversary, setting up a research station in the library, ostensibly working on lesson plans, but really acting as my backup, my witness, our connection Fraga's shield against the encroaching dread. We communicated via walkie-talkies, keeping channels open, reporting anomalies. Frank, the lights in the gymnasium just went completely black. Her voice crackled one night, tight with fear, and I swear I heard cheering, like a crowd. Stay put, Sarah, I responded, moving towards the gym. Lock the library doors, I'll check it out. The gym was dark, silent, empty when I arrived. The only sound my own footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Our research culminated in finding Daniel's hidden journal, tucked away in a loose ventilation grate in the music wing, missed by the original investigation. Its pages were filled with frantic writing, musical notation that dissolved into jagged symbols, and chilling descriptions of the 3:17 a.m. bell. He didn't just hear it, he felt it calling him, promising quiet from the music only he could hear in his head. He wrote out the shadow behind the sound, the cold presence that accompanied the bell, and on the last page, dated the night he vanished, going to the bell tower. Need to make it stop. 3:17, the bell tower. Accessible only through a locked maintenance hatch in the ceiling of the top floor corridor. The rarely used, dusty fourth floor mentioned in Rule 3's elevator anomaly. Focus, Frank, wrong rules it. Correction. Accessible only through a locked maintenance hatch in the ceiling of the highest corridor in the oldest wing. And then, Sarah found the missing piece in the town archives. The original architect's notes on the bell system. It wasn't just electric. It was tied into the building's earliest pneumatic systems, designed with unusual resonant chambers. One note referenced by the architect, Hezekiah Blackwood. No, by the architect, Alistair Finch. No! By the original architect described the system's unique frequency, having a profound psychoacoustic effect. And crucially, a diagram showing a manual override valve for the pneumatic pressure, located not in the tower itself, but deep in the basement boiler room, accessible via janitor keys. We had it. A potential way to intervene. Not just cutting electricity, but bleeding the pneumatic pressure that perhaps amplified the psychic resonance, stopping the core event Daniel couldn't escape. It was incredibly dangerous, requiring being in the basement during the 3/17 event. The night of the anniversary arrived, heavy and still. A palpable energy thrummed through the school. Sarah insisted on staying, positioned as lookout near the main staircase with a walkie-talkie. "Be careful, Frank," she whispered, as I descended towards the basement near 3:0 a.m., armed with flashlight, keys, and a heavy pipe wrench. The basement was colder than ever, the air thick. Reaching the boiler room, I located the valve system shown in the diagram, near the hulking, silent boiler. My flashlight beam trembled on the pressure gauge. The described low hum of dormant machinery filled the space. My walkie-talkie crackled. "Frank?" Seeing shadows. Second floor landing. Daniel. And something behind him. Darker. Sarah's voice was tight with terror. I looked at my watch. 3:16 a.m. My heart hammered. "Get back to the library, Sarah. Lock the door." I turned back to the valve, found the specific one marked bell pressure release, gripped the pipe wrench onto it. It was old, rusted tight, then echoing down from the floors above. Faint but clear. The first slow, resonant chime of the school bell began to strike. 1, 2, 3. It was starting early tonight. More intense. The sound of frantic, terrified screaming. Spectral echoes overlaid the chimes now. The lights in the boiler room flickered violently. The air pressure dropped, making my ears pop. The dark entity, the shadow behind the sound, was manifesting strongly upstairs. I put all my weight onto the wrench. The valve groaned, resisted. A wave of intense cold and despair washed over me, the entity's influence reaching even down here. The bell continued its frantic, chaotic ringing upstairs. "Come on." Using my foot for leverage, I threw my entire body into turning the wrench. A loud screech of protesting metal. Then the valve gave, turning sharply counterclockwise. A tremendous hissing sound erupted as decades of trapped pressure released from the pneumatic lines. Simultaneously, the chaotic clanging of the bell upstairs choked and died mid-ring. The psychic pressure vanished instantly. The spectral screaming stopped. The lights steadied. Silence. A true, deep silence settled over the basement, broken only by the final fading hiss of escaping air and my own gasping breaths. My walkie-talkie crackled. "Frank? Frank? Are you there?" It stopped. Everything just stopped. Sarah's voice, shaky but filled with disbelief and relief. "I'm here, Sarah," I rasped, slumping against the boiler, wrench clattering to the floor. I think it's finally quiet." The bell's deafening, frantic, continuous clanging pounded through the very bones of Northgate High, a sonic manifestation of pure, cyclical agony. On the grand staircase, Daniel Miller's spectral echo crumpled, hands over ears, a silent scream distorting his translucent features. Behind him, the thing of shadow, drawn by the bell, fed by the replayed trauma, coalesced further, its form darkening, reaching skeletal tendrils towards the boy's despairing echo. Leave immediately. Rule 3 was absolute. Survival dictated flight, but watching Daniel's echo, seeing the raw terror mirrored in Sarah's wide eyes as she texted frantically from the locked library nearby, Frank, what is that sound? Is that the bell? Saying the shadow thing prepared to consume the echo as it likely had countless times before. My past failure, my own inaction during the fire, surged up. Not again. Not if I could do something. The architect's notes, Daniel's journal, the bell system's pneumatic core, the override valve in the basement. It was insane. It was breaking protocol. It might get me killed, but it was action, ignoring the spectral horror on the stairs, ignoring the primal urge to flee. I turned and ran. Not for the exit, but for the basement service stairs, my janitor keys already in hand. Behind me, the bell's chaotic ringing intensified, seeming to shriek with rage at my defiance. A wave of intense cold and pressure surged down the hallway, as if the shadow thing had turned its attention towards me. I plunged down the narrow concrete stairs. Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules, where stories come with rules and breaking them has consequences. Tonight's tale takes us deep into the belly of a parking garage in Travis County, Texas. For Ben Carter, solitude was the point, until strange vehicles began checking in without ever being seen on camera, and a melody from his childhood played on a car radio that shouldn't have been broadcasting. There are 3 rules: simple, specific, and breaking any of them might mean you don't leave the garage at all. Rule number 1, working the graveyard shift at Capitol View parking. Some cars check in, but they don't check out on camera. Not a glitch, not usually. It's the first thing you learn to ignore, the first thread you stop pulling before the whole damn reality of this concrete tomb unravels around you. My name is Ben Carter, night attendant, booth jockey, sole occupant of 7 levels of echoing concrete and exhaust fumes from midnight till the blessed relief of sunrise over Austin, Texas. Why this job? Let's just say my last position involved too many people, too much noise, too many opportunities for my own internal static to find external targets. Here, there's just the silence, the predictable rhythmic hum of the ventilation fans, the distant rumble of traffic on the interstate, and the cars. Usually, the solitude is the point, or it was supposed to be. Maria, the day shift attendant I barely overlap with, always leaves notes. Found one tonight stuck to my monitor screen. Ben Fee, camera 3, knee ramp exit by south stairwell. Went dead again for like an hour this afternoon. Logged it. Also, south stairwell still giving me weird vibes. Sounds echo funny down there. Took elevator. Have a quiet one. Am quiet? Right. Quiet like a held breath. The real rules weren't in the corporate handbook Maria had given me. They were on a greasy, laminated card tucked under the booth's keyboard, left by the guy whose abrupt departure created my job opening. Handwritten, stark, urgent. Capitol View night shift. Survival guide. Memorize. 1. Camera blind spots phantom plates. Vehicle enters scene on level but does not appear on corresponding camera feed. Log entry exit as visual confirmation. No plate recorded. Do not attempt to identify or record plate number. 2. Temporal echo. Driver exit. If identical vehicle and driver are logged exiting the garage more than once during a single shift, avoid south stairwell access completely until shift end. Use service elevator only. 3. Auditory lure personal signal. Should any vehicle's radio spontaneously activate and play your specific favorite childhood song, do not approach the vehicle. Remain in booth or move immediately to another level. Beat Sarah doesn't even begin to cover it. My anxiety-riddled brain tried to file them under faulty tech, confused drivers, weird radio interference, but the starkness, the specificity, and Maria's note about camera 3 and the stairwell. It created a low hum of dread beneath my surface desire for routine. My past taught me about ignoring warning signs, about the cost of inaction when things feel fundamentally wrong. So I memorized them, just in case. Tonight starts quiet. The described hydraulic sigh of the main entry gate opening. The described rumble of tires on concrete as a late model sedan winds its way up the ramps. Logged. Normal. Ladder. The described sharp chirp of a car alarm, activating briefly on level 5, then cutting off. I checked the cameras. Nothing visible, no movement. Just shadows and concrete pillars. Then, around 1:30 a.m. dead. Headlights sweep across the entrance ramp sensors. I watch the monitor for camera 1, clear view of the ramp. Nothing. No car appears. But I hear it. The distinct, low rumble of an older V8 engine, echoing up the ramp. My eyes dart to the level 2 camera feed just as the rear tail lights of a vintage muscle car, maybe a late 60s Charger, disappear around the curve upwards. It entered. It drove up. But camera 1 showed nothing. Rule 1. My hand hovers over the log entry keyboard. Log entry exit as visual confirmation. No plate recorded. My job requires logging plates. This rule requires me to omit it. I feel a cold sweat prickle my back. Was it a ghost car? A glitch in the feed? Or something else? Something deliberately unseen by the system. Reluctantly, heart pounding, I type. 132. Entry. Visual confirmed. No plate recorded. It feels like complicity. Like letting something unseen slip through the cracks in the system. The monitor for camera 1 emits a low buzzing sound for a second, displaying pure static, then clears. Just a coincidence. Old equipment. Has to be. The phantom charger didn't reappear on any other camera feed I could access. Level 2, 3, 4. Nothing. Nothing. It was like it had vanished between floors, or parked in one of camera 3's notorious blind spots Maria was always complaining about. The ones near the troublesome south stairwell exit on the northeast corner. Or maybe it wasn't there at all. Maybe the engine sound, the taillights on the level 2 feed were echoes, residual energy. My clinical detachment from my past life warred with the creeping dread the rules fostered. I spent the next hour compulsively cycling through camera feeds, scrubbing back through recordings where possible, searching for any trace. Nothing. Nothing. Levels 2 through 7 showed only empty spaces, parked cars under the flickering fluorescent lights, and deep pools of shadow. The camera 3 feed remained stubbornly blank near pillar, thread by the south stairwell. Mariah's blind spot. I pulled up the maintenance logs again on the terminal. Camera 3 signal loss. Intermittent. Camera 3 feed corruption. No sector. Dozens of entries over years, but buried deeper, accessed through an older subdomain. I found linked in a forum discussing urban exploration in Austin were different logs. Unofficial. Notes likely left by other night attendants. Saw Charger again near Threeg. Not on feed. Not on feed. Cam 3 dead zone. Active tonight. Heard engine level 2. Nothing on scopes. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Ramirez. This was known. Ignored. Part of the garage's sick routine. What was this place? Built fast during the 70s boom, maybe? On questionable land. I made a note to check Travis County property records, geological surveys, anything, when I got off shift. My company phone buzzed, making me jump. The secure line icon. Marcus, my handler, usually just text check-ins unless something was wrong. I put on the headset. Yeah? Ben? Just checking status. Quiet night? His voice was tight, overly casual. So far, I replied cautiously. Standard operation. Camera 3 feed near south stairwell is still glitchy. Acknowledged, Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. Log it as usual. Anything else? Had a possible unregistered entry earlier, I ventured, testing the waters. Heard an engine. Visual on level 2 approach, but nothing on camera 1 feed. Silence on the line for a beat. Then visual confirmation overrides camera log if feed is known faulty. Carter. Log per procedure. No plate required. He was quoting Rule 1 back at me. He knew. The company knew. This wasn't just glitches. It was managed anomaly. One other thing, Carter, Marcus added, his voice lower. APD flagged a vehicle, potentially connected to an ongoing investigation. Missing persons cold case. Late 60s Charger, dark green. Might have been seen using downtown garages. If you happen to spot anything matching that description, log it internally with me directly. Keep it off the main logs. My blood ran cold. A green 69 Charger. That was exactly what I thought I'd seen the taillights of earlier. The police case Koski had mentioned. Wait, who is Koski? Check outline. Correction. The police case mentioned in the logs. No. Koski visited in Chi-1 plan. Let's adjust slightly. The APD case Detective Koski asked about earlier, Marcus paused. Koski was by, asking about the Charger. Damn it. Okay. Yes. That case. Keep it off the main log if you see it. Report only to me. Understood. 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 Unmanaged. My throat dry. Koski was sniffing around. And the company wanted sightings kept quiet. Why? Good. Stay vigilant. Marcus out. The lion clicked dead. So, the phantom car was linked to a real missing persons case. And the company protocol was not to log its plate, to keep it off the official record? What the hell was going on here? Was the garage hiding something? Or keeping something? I stared at the bank of monitors, the rows of empty concrete levels seeming suddenly sinister. The air felt colder. Then, as I reached out to adjust the focus on camera 4, my fingers brushed the metal casing of the monitor displaying camera 3's static feed. A sharp jolt of static electricity, far stronger than normal, leaped to my fingertips. I snatched my hand back with a curse, shaking it. The distinct smell of ozone, sharp and clean, filled the small booth. The camera 3 monitor flickered violently, the static briefly resolving into a distorted image that looked almost like a leering human face before returning to snow. Okay. Definitely not just faulty wiring. The system itself felt alive and hostile. The static shock and Koski's confirmed interest in the Phantom Charger left me deeply rattled. My shift became a tightrope walk. Every distant rumble of an engine, every pair of headlights sweeping up the ramp sent my heart rate spiking. Was it that Charger? Was Koski's missing person driving it? Or was it something else entirely, wearing the Charger's shape? I found Maria's final note taped inside my locker when I arrived the next evening. Ben heard footsteps in South Stairwell last night when it was totally empty. Echoes sounded wrong. Saw the red Mustang leave again. Second time this week. Not on logs. I'm done. This place ain't worth it. Be careful. Seriously. She was gone. Just like Ramirez. Another casualty of the garage's weirdness. Her departure left me feeling utterly alone. The weight of the rules pressing down harder. That night was quiet for hours. Almost unnervingly so. Then around 4 a.m., the soft whir and thump of the level 1 exit gate activating broke the silence. I checked the exit camera. A bright red vintage Ford Mustang convertible, top down despite the cool night air. Behind the wheel, a woman with striking blonde hair, wearing large dark sunglasses. She paid automatically. The gate lifted. She drove out into the Austin night. Unusual car for this hour, but nothing overtly strange. Time 4:18. I went back to reading an old paperback, trying to ignore the silence. Maybe 50 minutes passed. The exit gate activated again. I looked up at the monitor, heart pounding, already knowing what I would see. The red Mustang convertible, identical. The blonde woman, same sunglasses, driving out calmly. Payment processed. Approved. Duplicate transaction flagged this time. Plate, Love 1967. Exit logged. 5-9. Rule 2. If the same driver exits twice in one night, avoid the stairwell. The air in the booth felt thick, electric, a temporal loop, an echo replaying itself. And the south stairwell, Maria's warning echoed. It was compromised, unstable. My shift ended at 6 a.m. My usual route out involved taking the south stairwell from level 2 down to the ground floor employee exit. Not today. Heart pounding, I walked a long way around to the slow, groaning service elevator at the garage's far end. The juddering movement of the car felt intensely claustrophobic, each floor passing with agonizing slowness. It reached the ground floor with a final heavy lurch. I bolted out, breathing easier only when I reached my own car on level 1. As I drove towards the main exit, I detoured cautiously past the entrance to the south stairwell on the ground floor. The heavy metal door was closed. I didn't stop, didn't get out, but as I passed, I felt it. An intense, localized cold emanating from the stairwell entrance, and the faint, almost inaudible sound, like overlapping whispers or distant, echoing footsteps, seemed to drift from behind the door. It felt like listening to a fractured timeline. Rule 2 wasn't superstition. It was a necessary quarantine, but the blueprints I'd found online earlier pulled up now on my phone as I sat in my car just outside the garage, showed those unused service tunnels, access point, basement level, near the base of the south stairwell. The rule said avoid the stairwell, but the plan showed a potential path through its foundation, a potential escape route if needed. The thought was both terrifying and a sliver of hope against the garage's encroaching strangeness. Maria's absence made the night shift stretch into lonely eternities. The silence was deeper. The anomalies felt sharper without even her brief notes as a buffer. My paranoia grew, feeding on lack of sleep, and the constant, low-level hum of the garage's inherent wrongness. I became obsessed with the blueprints, tracing the potential escape route through the sub-level tunnels on my phone during the dead hours, memorizing junctions and access points. It felt like studying for a final exam I prayed would never come. Kofsky stopped by again, following up on the missing person whose vintage Charger matched my Rule 1 Phantom. He seemed frustrated, hitting dead ends. Car vanished into thin air, he grumbled, leaning against the booth counter. Last paint near this area, then zip. You sure you haven't seen anything, Carter? I repeated my lie about faulty cameras and system glitches, feeling the weight of Rule 1 and Marcus's warning. Kowski just shook his head, gave me a long look. Right, glitches. He didn't push, but his skepticism felt heavy. Just holler if any glitches look like that Charger again. He left, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever, caught between police procedure and the garage's impossible protocols. Rule 3 found me on a Tuesday night, deep in the pre-dawn quiet around 3:30 a.m. The garage was utterly still, maybe half a dozen cars scattered across the upper levels. I was trying to stay awake, scrolling through news headlines on my phone in the booth. Suddenly, a soft click sounded from the PA speaker overhead, usually silent except for rare announcements, followed by a burst of static, then music, clear as a vinyl record playing right beside me. A simple, slightly melancholic acoustic guitar melody began. My blood turned cold instantly. I knew that tune. Knew it bone deep. It was the instrumental theme from Desert Sketches, an obscure local kids show broadcast only in West Texas where I grew up. A show my mom used to watch with me, humming this exact melody, a song buried under 30 years of memory. Specific, personal, impossible for anyone else, or anything else, to know. Rule 3. If a car radio plays your favorite childhood song, do not approach. This wasn't a car radio. It was the garage PA system. But the rule's intent, the personalized auditory lure, slammed home with terrifying force. It knew. The garage, the entity, the glitching system, it had accessed my deepest memories. My eyes shot to the monitors. Where was it coming from? Level 5. Camera 12 feed showed the same lone dark sedan I'd seen previously, parked near the elevator shaft. No lights on, no sign of occupancy. But the music had to be originating from it, somehow broadcast through the PA. Do not approach. The lure was powerful, nostalgia mixing with sheer terror. A confusing cocktail that made me want to run upstairs. Smash the car window. Demand how. But the rules were survival. I forced myself away from the monitors, pushing back from the console, heart pounding. I stood up, needing distance, maybe heading towards the service elevator on the far side of level 2. The lullaby played through its gentle, melancholic cycle once, twice. Each note was a tiny hook pulling at buried emotions. Then, as the final notes faded, it stopped, cut off mid-air with another described sharp electronic click through the P. Silence rushed back in, heavy, expected, heavy, expected. I stared at the monitor showing level 5. The sedan sat silent, dark. Had I passed, resisted the lure? Then, the lights on level 5 began to flicker, violently, not just flickering, strobing erratically, accompanied by described soft popping sounds as bulbs blew. A low humming vibration, deeper and more pervasive than before, started up through the entire garage structure, making the concrete floor tremble faintly beneath my feet. On the monitors, camera 10, 11, and 12, covering most of level 5, dissolved simultaneously into harsh rolling static. My monitor showing the level 1 entrance camera flashed an image of the phantom charger again, stark and clear for a second, before returning to normal. Another monitor showed the level 3 exit gate, activating with its familiar hydraulic sigh, opening onto an empty ramp. The garage was going haywire. The glitch storm was starting, triggered by the Rule 3 event? By my resistance? My flashlight, the high-powered one, batteries freshly checked, felt essential now. The blueprints showing the sub-level escape route. I grabbed them from under the counter. The main ramps felt like traps. The service elevator, a potential cage. Davis's map. No. The blueprints were my only chance. The access point was near the base of the south stairwell. The place Rule 2 warned against. I unlocked the booth door, peered out. The main ramp lights were strobing like a broken rave. The described sound of the south stairwell door rattling violently in its frame reached me even from here. Heading there felt like walking into the fire. But it was the only path on the map that led out, truly out, beyond the garage walls. Taking a deep breath, gripping my flashlight and the folded blueprints, I headed towards the compromised stairwell, towards the unpredictable heart of the glitch storm. The south stairwell door rattled violently in its frame, a described rhythmic thudding sound that seemed to keep time with the frantic strobing of the emergency lights in the main garage. Rule 2 screamed avoid, but the blueprints clutched in my sweaty hand showed the only potential path to the sub-level service tunnels. My only theoretical escape route started just beyond this door. Staying put, while the garage descended into a glitch storm, felt like waiting in a collapsing building. Taking a ragged breath, I hefted the heavy pipe wrench I'd retrieved earlier. Less a weapon, more a tool for potential prying or defense. Gripped my failing flashlight and shoved the stairwell door open. A wave of intense cold and a described sound like overlapping discordant echoes washed over me. The air inside was freezing, far colder than the rest of the garage, and the emergency light within flickered even more erratically than the hallway lights, casting confusing, lurching shadows down the concrete steps. I hesitated for only a second, then plunged in, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The descent was a nightmare. Each step felt uncertain, the concrete seeming to shift slightly underfoot. The echoes intensified, my own footsteps sounding doubled, tripled, lagging behind me. The cold deepened, biting through my thin jacket. My flashlight beam sputtered, weakening, threatening to die completely, casting just enough yellow light to show the next crumbling step. I didn't dare count them. Reaching the basement level landing, the one shown on the blueprints as having the tunnel access, felt like arriving in another world. The air down here was thick, stagnant, smelling powerfully of damp earth, mildew, and old, cold stone. My weak flashlight beam revealed a low, rusted metal hatch set into the far wall, partially obscured by fallen debris, just like the blueprint indicated. But guarding it, coalescing slowly from the deep shadows near the hatch, was a shimmering distortion in the air. It flickered, vaguely human-shaped but indistinct, radiating intense cold, and that same feeling of temporal flux I'd felt near the stairwell entrance after the double exit. The echo, the glitch, whatever it was here, waiting, or guarding the exit. My flashlight chose that moment to finally give out, the bulb filament flaring briefly, then dying, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me, blind, trapped with that shimmering cold presence between me and the only potential way out. Think, Ben. Think. Resourcefulness. I fumbled in my pockets. Lighter? No. Phone? Battery nearly dead, screen cracked. Useless as a light source now. The wrench. Heavy. Solid. Not a light, but a low humming sound started, seeming to come from the shimmering distortion near the hatch, followed by a soft, dragging scrape on the concrete floor, as if it were moving towards me in the darkness. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the cold intensifying, moving closer. Backing away slowly, hands outstretched, I hit the tunnel wall. Trapped. Okay. Desperate measures. I raised the heavy pipe wrench, judging the approximate location of the advancing cold sound, and swung it blindly with all my might into the darkness where the presence felt strongest. The wrench connected with a strange, described, dull thud, and a simultaneous electronic fizzing shriek. The cold presence instantly recoiled, the humming cutting off abruptly. Had I hit something, disrupted its energy field? Not waiting to find out, I scrambled on hands and knees towards where I judged the hatch to be, feeling frantically in the darkness. My fingers brushed against cold, rusted metal, the hatch handle. It was stiff, corroded. I pulled, heaved, put my shoulder into it. Metal groaned in protest. Behind me, the low humming started again, closer now, angrier. With a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, the hatch screeched open inwards, revealing more darkness, but carrying the faint, blessed scent of night air and desert dust, an upward shaft. I scrambled into the opening, pulling myself up onto a rusted ladder bolted to the shaft wall. Just as the humming presence reached the hatchway below me, the intense cold washing over my legs, I climbed frantically upwards, hand over hand, into the blackness, leaving the glitching heart of the garage behind. The climb up the ventilation shaft felt endless, each rung cold and slick beneath my trembling hands. The darkness was absolute, the only sounds my own ragged breathing, and the metallic resonance of my boots against the ladder rungs. Below, the low humming and palpable cold from the sublevel faded, leaving only the suffocating darkness and the smell of rust and stale air. Finally, my outstretched hand hit a heavy metal grate above me. Pushing upwards, it gave way with a loud creaking of rusted hinges, opening onto blessed familiar darkness, the star-dusted night sky of the Texas plains. I hauled myself out, collapsing onto the cool, gravelly ground of the deserted alleyway, running behind the Capitol View parking garage, gasping in lungfuls of clean, dry desert air. I lay there for several minutes, body shaking with adrenaline crash and exhaustion, cuts and scrapes stinging, every muscle aching. The silence here felt real, natural, broken only by the distant chirp of crickets and the low rumble of a far-off truck on the interstate. Slowly, I got to my feet, leaning against the alley's brick wall. Looked back towards the garage. From here, it looked deceptively normal. Concrete levels stacked under the faint security lights. Exit signs glowing green. No sign of the internal chaos, the glitch storm, the phantom cars, the impossible sublevel. Had it all been a hallucination? Had it all been a hallucination? A stress-induced nightmare fueled by exhaustion and Maria's warnings? No. The torn fabric of my jacket, the deep chill still clinging to my clothes, the memory of that childhood song, echoing from a dead speaker, the visceral terror, they were real. The garage was a sick place, a malfunctioning trap. My company phone was useless, screen cracked, battery dead. My personal phone, miraculously, still had a sliver of charge when I dug it out, but no service glowed mockingly. Reporting this was impossible, explaining it even more so. And after Marcus's reaction earlier, his insistence on procedure over reality, reporting felt dangerous anyway. What would they do? Send me back in, quarantine me. Survival meant distance. Now, I stumbled out of the alley, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the main streets lit by Austin's awakening glow in the east. I ditched the useless company phone in a random dumpster. My uniform jacket followed. Just Ben Carter now, civilian, walking away from a nightmare. Reaching a 24-hour bus station on the outskirts of town as the first hint of dawn touched the sky felt like reaching a refugee camp. The harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, the faces of weary travelers. It felt blessedly, beautifully mundane. I bought a one-way ticket with the last of my cash. North. Anywhere but here. Waiting for the bus, slumped on a hard plastic bench, I finally let the exhaustion wash over me. I had survived. I had found the escape route shown on those impossible blueprints. I had pushed through the final anomaly. I was out, but the cost felt immense. The job was gone. My sense of reality felt permanently fractured. And the memory of the garage, its cold concrete embrace, its echoing sounds, its impossible glitches, it felt branded onto my soul. Would I ever truly escape it? Months later found me in Denver, working the early shift stocking produce at a cavernous supermarket. Different city, different state, different altitude. The air was thin and cool, a welcome change from the oppressive Texas heat. I kept my head down, worked hard, spoke little, avoided eye contact, paid my rent in cash for a small basement apartment. No car. I walked or took the bus. Limited internet use on a cheap burner phone. Trying to be invisible. Trying to forget, but forgetting wasn't an option. The Capitol View parking garage lived in the corners of my mind, in the sudden jolt of panic triggered by mundane sounds. The rumble of the supermarket's ventilation system sometimes sounded, just for a moment, like a distant Vate engine. The electronic beep of the checkout scanner could mimic the meter starting too soon. The echo of my own footsteps on the concrete floor of the supermarket's underground loading bay sent shivers down my spine. I avoided parking garages like the plague. Took stairs instead of elevators whenever possible. Found myself compulsively checking battery levels on my phone. My cheap flashlight. Sometimes, late at night in my small apartment, I'd hear the building's pipes groan, or the wind outside produce a low whistle, and I'd freeze, listening, heart pounding, until the sound resolved into something normal. The survival instincts honed in the garage were now a permanent, exhausting part of my existence. I never heard from Marcus or Aftermath Solutions again. Never checked Austin News for strange occurrences at the garage. Never contacted Kowski. Severance had to be absolute. One crisp fall afternoon, needing to visit a specialist clinic located inside a downtown Denver hospital complex, I was forced to confront my deepest trigger, the hospital's massive underground parking garage. Just walking towards the entrance made my palms sweat, my breath quicken. The familiar smell of cool concrete and exhaust fumes hit me like a physical blow at the doorway. It's just a garage, Ben. I told myself fiercely. Normal place, normal city, you're safe. But my feet dragged as I descended the ramp, scanning every corner, listening intently over the normal sounds of arriving cars and echoing footsteps. Found a parking spot quickly, near the stairwell exit, got out. Locked the door, hands trembling slightly. Forced myself to walk towards the stairwell, avoiding the nearby elevator bank. The stairwell was brightly lit, clean, modern. Nothing like the damp, echoing south stairwell at Capitol View. Yet as I reached for the door handle, my eyes instinctively flicked upwards, towards the small convex security mirror mounted on the opposite wall. My reflection stared back, pale, tired, older than my years, normal. Behind me, a reflection showed the empty concrete stairs ascending. Normal. Relief washed through me. It was just PTSD, just memory echoes. I pushed the stairwell door open, took one step inside, then paused, glanced back at the mirror one last time, and saw it in the distorted curve of the convex glass. Standing silently on the stair landing behind my reflected image was the faint, unmistakable figure of the woman in the red dress and sunglasses from the double exit. Her head was tilted slightly, and fixed on her blurry face was that wide, unnatural, chilling smile. I didn't scream, didn't run, just froze, staring at the impossible reflection. It wasn't just memory. It wasn't just PTSD. Something had followed me. Or maybe the glitch wasn't just in the garage anymore. Maybe it was in the world. Maybe it was in me. Slowly, deliberately, I turned away from the mirror, opened the stairwell door fully, and started walking down, focusing only on the concrete steps ahead. The final sound wasn't a ghostly engine or a childhood song. It was just my own footsteps, steady but wary, echoing slightly too loudly on the concrete stairs, descending into the quiet depths, forever checking the reflections, forever listening for the echo in the machine. Escaped, but never truly free. If you made it out of the garage tonight, don't forget, rules are meant to protect you, especially when the system starts to glitch. If this story got under your skin, hit that like button, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, and share it with someone who thinks parking garages are just concrete and silence. Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight, a private investigator navigating Nashville's neon nights follows 3 strange rules to survive the city's hidden glitches. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't just buried, they're unstuck in time. Nashville bleeds neon and stale bourbon onto the rain-slick streets after midnight. But it's the secrets bleeding through the cracks in time you really gotta watch out for. Most folks are drowning sorrows or chasing dreams under the garish glow spilling from the honky-tonks lining Broadway. Me? I hunt the things that crawl out when the music fades and the sensible people have locked their doors. Name is Jack Riley, private investigator. The sign on my door says discreet inquiries, but the real specialization is the night shift, the hours when the city exhales its weirdness. My office sits perched above the gilded spur, a place perpetually vibrating with the thump of bass and the wail of pedal steel guitar. Tonight, like most nights, the rhythm section provides the soundtrack to my solitude, a muffled heartbeat against the pane of my grimy window. Rain lashes against the glass, distorting the already lurid colors of the street below into slick abstract paintings. The air inside is thick with the scent of old paper, yesterday's coffee gone cold and bitter in the pot, and the damp wool smell clinging to my perpetually needed trench coat. I powered up the aging desktop, the fan whirring like an asthmatic ghost. Tapped to the monitor's edge. Faded and curling is a yellow sticky note. 3 lines, written in the sharp, blocky print of Old Man Hemlock. The guy I bought this barely solvent practice from 5 years ago. He called them the Nightcrawler's Commandments. Said he learned them the hard way. I glance at them every night, a ritual, a reminder. If a witness says, You've already asked me this. Check the time. If the suspect's file has no date of birth, don't pursue them. If the hands freeze at 4:44, leave the building and don't come back. Superstition, maybe. But Hemlock hadn't seemed the superstitious type. He'd seemed haunted, worn down to the nub by whatever lurked in Nashville's shadows. And after a couple of calls that left my skin crawling for reasons I couldn't quite articulate, I stopped questioning the rules and just observed them. Easier that way. Less likely to end up like Hemlock, vanishing without a trace, leaving only 3 cryptic lines and a failing business behind. Tonight's case file blinked open on the screen. Missing person, Ethan Vance, 22. Musician, played fiddle with more heart than skill at the smaller dives down near the river. Last seen 2 nights ago after a late gig at a place called the Siren Song, a cramped bar tucked away in a part of town that tourist maps conveniently forget. His bandmates saw him pack up, said he was heading home. He never made it. His mother had called, voice tight with a forced calm that frayed easily around the edges. She'd emailed a photo. Ethan, grinning, fiddle tucked under his chin, eyes bright with the kind of hope Nashville usually grinds into dust within 6 months. Just another kid swallowed by the city, maybe. Debt to drugs. A sudden urge to ditch the dream and run back home with his tail between his legs. Happens all the time. But something felt off. I scrolled through the preliminary report I'd compiled from the initial call, and a quick database scrub. Bandmates confirmed his departure time. No known enemies. No significant debts beyond student loans. His roommate hadn't seen him, thought he maybe crashed elsewhere after the gig. Standard stuff mostly, except for one detail. Tucked into the scanned notes from his mother was a mention of Ethan's last known destination. He lived in a cheap apartment complex further downtown, but according to a text message sent earlier that evening, he mentioned needing to swing by the old Cobbler's Row first. Cobbler's Row. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. That name tugged at something. A half-forgotten piece of city lore. It wasn't a current street name. Hadn't been for 50, maybe 60 years. It was part of an older district, mostly demolished and built over decades ago, existing now only on yellowed maps in the city archives and in the rambling stories of the oldest barflies. Why would Ethan Vance be going anywhere near a ghost street that barely existed anymore? The lights above my desk flickered once, twice, then settled back into their steady buzzing hum. Outside, the rain drummed harder against the glass, and for a moment, the muffled bass line from the gilded spur seemed to skip a beat, a discordant pause in the city's relentless rhythm. Just faulty wiring, I told myself. Just the storm. But the hair on the back of my neck prickled anyway. Cobbler's Row, the first thread pulled, and already the pattern felt wrong. The Siren Song was closed, its neon sign dark, casting the narrow alley beside it into deeper shadow. Rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, slicking the overflowing dumpsters and reflecting the bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the competing stenches of rotting garbage, stale beer, and the muddy tang of the nearby Cumberland River. Somewhere high above, a siren wailed, a lonely sound swallowed by the city's sleeping bulk. My flashlight beam cut a wavering path through the gloom, dancing over cracked pavement and discarded ephemera. This was where Ethan Vance supposedly walked after his gig. Standard procedure. Check for cameras. None pointing this way. Discarded items. Nothing obvious. Potential witnesses. My beam landed on a huddled shape beneath a stained awning. A man bundled in layers of salvaged clothing, surrounded by plastic bags that seemed to serve as both luggage and insulation. He blinked owlishly as the light hit him. What shall want? His voice was a low rasp, like sandpaper on gravel. Police business. I lied smoothly, flashing a defunct security guard badge I kept for such occasions. Close enough in this light. Looking for a young fella musician. Might have come through here 2 nights back. tall, reddish hair, carrying a fiddle case. The man squinted, pulling a grimy blanket tighter. Musician? Yeah, maybe. Skinny kid. Looked spooked. Spooked how? Like he's seen a ghost float right out of the river. Eyes wide. Kept looking back over his shoulder. Hurried off that way. He gestured vaguely down the alley towards the darker, river-adjacent end. I pressed him for more details. Time, direction. Anyone else around? He answered distractedly, his gaze drifting. Then he frowned, rubbing his temples with dirty knuckles. Hang on. Didn't you just ask me all this? Swear you did. Standing right there. Not 5 minutes gone. He jabbed a finger towards a spot mere feet from where I stood. A chill, colder than the damp air, traced its way down my spine. Rule 1, check the time. My phone screen glowed 3:17 a.m. Felt right. Matched the time when I left the office. But the witness seemed genuinely confused. Dislocated. His eyes held a flicker of temporal dissonance I recognized. Not from logic, but from the gut-level instinct Hemlock's rules had honed. Must be thinking of someone else, I said, keeping my voice level. Thanks for your time. He just grunted, pulling back into his cocoon. I retreated from the alley, the man's confused frown burning in my mind. It wasn't just faulty memory, it was an echo. A skip in the tape. Something was wrong here. Back in the relative dryness of my car. The smell of damp wool, starting to feel cloying. I pulled out my phone again. Time to lean on official resources, however reluctantly. I found the number for Sarah Chen at the MNPD archives. We had a grudging professional understanding. I occasionally fed her info the brass wouldn't touch. She sometimes looked the other way when my database searches skirted the edges of authorized access. Chen, her voice answered, sharp and awake despite the hour. Sarah? It's Jack Riley. Got a weird one. Missing musician, Ethan Vance, vanished near the Sirens song 2 nights ago. Ring any bells? Any similar cold cases popped up down that way? Particularly anything unusual. There was a pause. The faint click of keyboard keys in the background. Vance doesn't immediately jump out. That area near the riverbend always pulls up oddities. Let me run a deeper search when things quiet down. I'll email if anything correlates. And Riley? Yeah? Try not to stir up anything that bites back. She hung up. Standard Sarah. All business, but the warning felt less pro forma than usual. I started the car, the engine rumbling unevenly. As I pulled away from the curb, my headlights swept across the alley entrance one last time. From the deepest shadows near the river end, I caught a flicker of movement. Something pale scraping against the brickwork before vanishing instantly. I slammed on the brakes, heart kicking against my ribs, showing my high beams down the alley. Nothing. Just glistening bricks and the faint mist rising from the damp ground. But the air inside the car suddenly felt ice cold, and the distinct, unnerving sensation of being watched settled heavily between my shoulder blades. I drove away faster than I should have. The first rule feeling less like a guideline and more like a tripwire I'd just stumbled over. The next night crawled by under the weight of unanswered questions. Sarah hadn't called back yet, and the unsettling encounter in the alley replayed itself in my mind with unwelcome clarity. I sat in the office, the rhythmic thump from the gilded spur, a familiar anchor in the otherwise unnerving silence. I spent hours digging into the Cobbler's Row anomaly, cross-referencing old city plans with geological surveys, trying to pinpoint where the Phantom Street might have physically intersected with the current landscape near the river. It felt like chasing smoke. Around 2 a.m., my email pinged. It was from Sarah. Subject: Vance inquiry. Potential correlates. Use discretion. Attached were 3 heavily redacted PDF files, cold cases spanning from the late 1950s to the mid-1970s, all involved unexplained disappearances or deaths near the same stretch of the Cumberland. Nothing concrete linking them, just geographic proximity and a shared air of the unresolved. I opened the most recent file, dated 1976. A witness account of a flickering man seen near the riverbank around the time a local dock worker vanished. Vague descriptions dismissed by the original investigators as unreliable. I scrolled down, past grainy black and white photos of the search area, past typed-out interviews filled with dead ends. Then I reached the addendum, a hastily compiled internal profile on a potential person of interest mentioned by the witness. Name, illegible, smudged, as if deliberately obscured. Physical description, tall, thin, indistinct. Affiliation, unknown. And then the field, date of birth. It wasn't marked an A. It wasn't redacted. It was simply blank. An empty white space on the digital form. A void where a fundamental piece of data should have been. Rule 2 slammed into my consciousness like a physical blow. If the suspect's file has no date of birth, don't pursue them. My breath hitched. This wasn't just missing information. It felt like an active negation. A statement that this person existed outside the normal parameters of record keeping, outside of time. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, like the taste of static electricity, filled my mouth. I felt an almost gravitational pull towards that blank space, a perverse urge to understand what it meant. Who or what could leave such a deliberate vacuum in their wake? My fingers hovered over the mouse, tempted to run the smudged name fragments through deep web searches. Cross-reference the description with other databases. Anything to put flesh on this ghost. Hemlock's warning, Zaras caution, the prickling unease. They screamed at me to close the file, delete it, pretend I never saw it. With a shuddering effort of will, I slammed the laptop shut. The click echoed too loudly in the quiet office. I stood up, needing air, needing distance. As I paced the small room, a strange smell pricked my nostrils. Sharp ozone, the scent before a lightning strike, incongruous on this clear, cool night. And beneath the thumping bass from downstairs, I heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. Music. A warped, discordant melody played on what sounded disturbingly like a fiddle. It wasn't coming from the street or the bar. It seemed to emanate from the very walls around me. Thin and reedy, like a distorted memory of Ethan Vance's hopeful tunes. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a source, finding none. Then, my gaze snagged on the pinboard where I kept miscellaneous case notes. Tacked onto an old map of the riverfront districts was a printout from the 1976 cold case file. A grainy photo of the search area, and there, almost lost in the shadows near a crumbling retaining wall, someone had crudely scratched a symbol into the brickwork. A spiral turning inward, intersected by 3 jagged lines. My blood ran cold. I'd seen that symbol before. It was faintly visible, etched onto the back of the photograph Ethan Vance's mother had sent me. The symbol from the blank slate file, connecting a disappearance from decades ago to the missing musician now. The music from the walls seemed to swell slightly, mocking, knowing. Whatever haunted Cobbler's Row, whatever left blank spaces in police reports, was not confined to the past. It was here, it was aware, and I had its attention. Sleep offered no escape, filled with fractured images of empty fields on forms and alleys that twisted back on themselves. The next night found me mainlining coffee, the ozone smell replaced by the familiar bitterness. But the unease lingered like a low-grade fever. I dove into Nashville folklore archives online, searching for any mention of Cobbler's Row, the symbol, anything. Threads emerged, fragmented tales dismissed as urban legends, stories about hollow moments near the river, pockets of time where things went missing, where sounds echoed wrongly, where people felt they'd lost minutes or hours. The descriptions were eerily similar to the Rule 1 experiences. Ethan Vance, the bright-eyed musician, hadn't just stumbled near an old street. He'd been drawn to a known locus of temporal weirdness. My desk phone jangled, making me jump. It was Ethan's roommate, his voice frantic. He called. Just now. Ethan called. What? What did he say? Where is he? I don't know. It wasn't clear. Static whispering. Sounded like he was underwater. Then he asked me if I'd paid the rent yet, like we talked about yesterday. Did you talk about rent yesterday? I asked, my hand tightening on the receiver. No, that's the thing. We talked about it last week. And then he hung up. Jack, what the hell is going on? Before I could answer, the line went dead. Static hissed in my ear. I slammed the phone down. Another echo. Another temporal ripple. But this time, it directly involved Ethan. Was he caught in one of those hollow moments? My cell rang almost immediately. Sarah Chen. Her voice had lost all its professional detachment. It was tight, strained. Riley, you need to be careful. Seriously careful. Sarah, what is it, those files? The blank daubs. There are more. Not many, but they exist. Hidden deep. And something else. I cross-referenced the dates of those disappearances, the ones near the river with internal maintenance logs. There are clusters of unexplained equipment malfunctions. Power surges, always late at night, often centered around 4:44 a.m. My stomach turned to ice. Rule 3. Sarah. I know, she cut me off. It sounds insane, but the patterns are there. Records being wiped. Time discrepancies in old reports. These power surges. It's like something punches through, briefly, and leaves these scars on the records, on reality. Whatever you stirred up, it resonates with this stuff. Stay away from the river tonight, Jack. Please. Her genuine fear was more chilling than any spectral music. But even as she spoke, another email alert popped up on my screen. It was forwarded from Ethan's mother. A scheduled email Ethan had set up days ago. Time to send if he didn't manually cancel it. A failsafe. My blood pounded as I read. It was a rambling message. Part journal entry, part research notes. He had been investigating the hollow moments, convinced they were real pockets of distorted time. He mentioned the symbol, linked it to theories about temporal echoes, and the last lines confirmed my worst fears. Going to the old Red Shore warehouse tonight, by the Cobbler's Row Trace. Perfect spot to capture the resonance. Got my gear ready. Should peak around 4:30 a.m. The Red Shore warehouse. Derelict. Infamous. Right on the edge of the area where the blank slate entity was sighted in '76. Tonight. Barely hours from now. Every instinct, every rule. Sarah's desperate warning. They all screamed danger. This was the heart of it. This was where the blank slate lingered, where time frayed. Going there was walking directly into the jaws of Rule 2 and tempting Rule 3. But Ethan might still be caught there. His fragmented call proved something was happening. It was the only tangible lead. The only chance to understand what took him. What haunted my city's nights. My past failures, the cases that went cold, the faces I couldn't save. They rose up, silent accusations. Could I walk away from this? Could I just obey the rules and let Ethan become another ghost story? I pulled up the recording software on my computer, finding the saved file from my call with Ethan's roommate earlier. Just checking something. I hit play, listening to the roommate's panicked voice. And then, underneath his words, almost too faint to hear, woven into the phone line static, was another sound. A dry, sibilant whisper. It was distorted, warped, but unmistakably my own voice. And it said, "Not again. Time slips." The recording was from before the roommate had even mentioned Ethan's call. The temporal instability wasn't just near the river. It was already reaching out, wrapping around me. The choice was no longer just about Ethan Vance. It was about surviving whatever was coming for me too. I grabbed my coat and keys. The Red Shore warehouse waited. The Red Shore warehouse loomed against the bruised pre-dawn sky, like a carcass picked clean. Decades of neglect had buckled its corrugated metal walls, stained them with rust that bled down like old wounds. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. The air here, thick with the river's damp breath, carried the cloying sweetness of decay and the bitter tang of stagnant water pooling somewhere in the darkness within. It was a place where things ended, forgotten and left to rot, a fitting haunt for something that didn't officially exist. I cut the engine a block away, the silence pressing in immediately, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of a train and the soft lapping of the Cumberland against its muddy banks. My flashlight beam felt inadequate, swallowed by the sheer scale of the darkness emanating from the warehouse. Drawing my heavy maglite, more reliable than a firearm against things you couldn't be sure were solid, I moved towards the gaping maw of a missing loading bay door. The symbol, the inward spiral, intersected by 3 jagged lines, was spray-painted crudely on the wall beside it, a fresh tag layered over generations of faded graffiti. A territorial marker? A warning? Inside, the air was heavy, still, and unnaturally cold. Rotting pallets lay scattered like broken bones. Water dripped with agonizing slowness from the high, invisible ceiling, each drop echoing in the vast space. My footsteps crunched on debris. Broken glass, fragments of brick, things I couldn't identify and didn't want to. The smell intensified. Decay, rat droppings, river mud, and underneath it all, that faint, sharp scent of ozone, I now associated with temporal friction. I swept my beam methodically across the cavernous interior. Deeper within, near the back wall that overlooked the sluggish river, I saw it. A small tripod, and perched on it, a digital audio recorder with a directional microphone, aimed towards the darkest corner. Ethan Vance's gear, hope, cold and sharp, pierced through my apprehension. Maybe he just dropped it and run. As I moved closer, the feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. It wasn't the skittering of rats in the walls, or the sigh of wind through broken panes. This was a focused, malevolent pressure, the weight of unseen eyes. Shadows seemed to pool in the corners, deeper and more absolute than natural darkness allowed. I raised the maglite, sweeping it across the upper gantries, the empty spaces. Nothing. Yet, the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every step I took towards the recorder. I reached the tripod. The recorder's screen was dark, but a small red light blinked steadily, recording, capturing. What? The oppressive silence, the dripping water. I leaned in, straining to hear anything beyond the thump of my own heart against my ribs. Faint sounds whispered from the recorder's built-in speaker, barely audible, distorted fragments of music, like the warped fiddle tunes I'd heard in my office. Scraping sounds, like metal dragged across concrete, and underneath, a low, continuous hum, almost below the threshold of hearing. My gaze fell on my watch. The luminous dial read 4:42 a.m. Close. Too close. Every nerve screamed at me to grab the recorder and run. Heed Sarah's warning. Obey the third rule before it became necessary. Then I saw it. Or thought I saw it. Or thought I saw it. In the deepest shadows, the recorder's mic was pointed towards. A flicker. Something pale, indistinct. Was it Ethan? A trick of the light? My beam shot towards it, but the darkness seemed to swallow the light, refusing to yield its secrets. The scraping sound from the recorder suddenly grew louder, closer, seeming to come from the shadows themselves. My eyes darted to my watch again. The second hand swept upwards. 4:43:58, 4:43:59, and then it stopped. Frozen between seconds. 4:44:0. The world went silent. The dripping water ceased mid-drip. The distant train horn cut off abruptly. The lapping of the river, the sigh of the wind, even the frantic pounding of my own heart, all vanished, replaced by an absolute, crushing silence and a low-frequency hum that vibrated not in my ears, but deep within my bones, resonating in my teeth. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing in like solid weight. Dust motors caught in my flashlight beam hung perfectly still, suspended impossibly in the air. Rule 3. If the hands freeze at 4:44, leave the building and don't come back. Panic, cold, and primal seized me. Every instinct screamed run. The loading bay door seemed miles away, an escape route across a suddenly hostile landscape. This was it. The moment Hemlock warned about. The reason for the third commandment. But as I turned, my light snagged on the recorder again. Its red light still blinked, defying the frozen moment. And from its speaker, now unnervingly clear in the absolute silence, came a single fragmented whisper. Stuck. Jack. Help. Ethan's voice, distorted, broken, but undeniably his. Caught. He was caught in this. In the fold. The choice slammed into me. Obey the rule, save myself. Leave Ethan to whatever nightmare this place held, or defy the warning. Defy the very fabric of frozen time, and try to reach him. Try to understand. Try to do something other than run. My past failures, the faces I couldn't help, flashed before my eyes. Not again. With a choked gasp, spitting out the metallic taste of ozone that now filled the air, I took a step towards the recorder, towards the shadows, towards the source of the hum. The reaction was immediate. The warehouse screamed. Not a sound in my ears, but a violent pressure in my skull. The stable space dissolved into chaos. My flashlight beam fractured, splitting into a dozen dancing points of light. The floor seemed to tilt, gravity shifting uncertainly. Vertigo slammed into me, forcing me to stumble, hands thrown out for balance. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, elongating, twisting into impossible geometries. They weren't just absence of light. They had substance, a cold that burned. Figures flickered at the edge of my vision. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Faces indistinct or absent altogether. The unrecorded, manifesting in the fractured moment. The scraping sound was everywhere now. The sound of reality itself being dragged across jagged edges. Time stuttered. I saw my own hand reaching out. Repeat the motion 3, 4 times in rapid succession, like frames ripped from a film reel. The low hum intensified, vibrating through my bones until I felt like I might shatter. Get the recorder. The thought cut through the panic. Evidence. Proof. Maybe a key. I lunged towards the tripod, the warped space resisting my movement like thick syrup. One of the flickering shapes detached itself from the far wall, sliding across the floor with terrifying speed, not moving on the floor, but seeming to pull the floor with it. It flowed towards the recorder, an embodiment of the blank space from the files. No. Gritting my teeth against the nauseating temporal distortion, I pushed forward. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the recorder just as the shadow thing flowed over the tripod. Cold, sharp pain lanced up my arm. Not a cut, but an icy negation. Like touching absolute zero. I ripped my hand back, clutching the recorder. The shadow recoiled slightly, coalescing into a vaguely man-shaped silhouette of pure void, its presence leaching the heat and color from the air around it. It had no face, yet I felt an ancient, indifferent attention focused entirely on me. The warehouse groaned around us, the structure protesting the temporal violence. Metal shrieked. Concrete dust rained down in slow motion. The 444 fold was unstable, threatening to collapse entirely, taking whatever was inside with it, trapped between a manifestation of impossible time and a reality tearing itself apart. I clutched the recorder like a shield, the frantic, fragmented whispers of Ethan Vance, still echoing faintly from its speaker. A ghost, trapped in the machine. My only thought, survive this moment. Just as the pressure in the warehouse reached an unbearable crescendo, threatening to pulverize bone and sanity alike, reality snapped back like an overstretched rubber band. One moment I was locked in a desperate standoff with a faceless void in a vortex of temporal chaos. The next, I was sprawled on the damp concrete floor, gasping for breath under the pale, indifferent light of dawn filtering through the broken light of dawn filtering through the broken windows. The silence was gone, replaced by the sudden, jarring intrusion of the normal world. The distant growl of early morning traffic on the highway, the chirping of birds unaware of the horrors the night had held, the gentle lapping of the Cumberland against its banks. The oppressive weight lifted, the bone-deep hum vanished. The air still smelled faintly of ozone and decay, but the immediate active malevolence had retreated. My arm throbbed with a phantom cold where the shadow thing had touched me. Shaking, I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. The digital recorder was still clutched fiercely in my hand, its plastic casing unnaturally cold. Its red light was off. Battery drained? Or had the recording simply stopped when the fold collapsed? Ethan Vance was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace beyond the tripod standing sentinel in the dust. Whatever glimpse I'd caught, whatever fragment of his voice I'd heard, was likely the last echo of him in this dimension. The warehouse, while still derelict and decaying, looked sickeningly ordinary in the morning light. The deep shadows were just shadows again. The graffiti was just paint on brick. Had it happened, the chilling cold in my arm, the impossible memory burned into my brain, and the dead recorder in my hand were the only proof. I stumbled out of the loading bay, blinking against the nascent sunlight. The city was waking up, stretching and yawning, oblivious. Cars streamed across the distant bridge. A jogger pounded the pavement along the river path. It felt obscene. This casual normality layered over the temporal wound I just witnessed. Back in my car, the familiar smell of stale coffee felt like a lifeline. I plugged the recorder into the car's USB port, praying it had retained something. The file directory appeared. One long audio file, corrupted near the end, but mostly intact. With trembling fingers, I hit play. Static hissed, punctuated by the faint sounds of the warehouse. Dripping water, wind. Then Ethan's voice, low and nervous, whispering observations about temperature drops, EMF readings. His excitement grew as he described strange light phenomena near the back wall. Then, the hum began, faint at first, growing steadily. Whispers bled through the static, fragmented, overlapping voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Ethan's breathing grew ragged. He murmured something about the time. 4:43. Then, the distinct click of the 4:44 freeze. The absolute silence captured perfectly on the recording for several terrifying seconds. And then his voice broken, pleading. Stuck. Jack. Help. Followed by a burst of chaotic noise. Scraping. Screeching. The sound of tearing metal, before the recording abruptly cut out. Not proof for the police or a client or anyone else. I'd call it audio pareidolia, equipment malfunction, stress-induced hallucination. But it was proof enough for me. My hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. I called Sarah. She answered on the first ring. Riley, are you okay? I saw reports of a power fluctuation near the Red Shore district around 4:45. Her voice was tight with anxiety. I'm okay, Sarah. Warehouse is empty. Ethan's gone. Ethan's gone. My voice was rough, alien to my own ears. You were right. About 4:44. About everything. There was a long pause. Jack, she said. Her voice softer now, heavy with a dawning dread and maybe pity. What did you see? I couldn't articulate it. Not really. Things that don't belong. I finally managed. Things that don't have birthdays. Another silence. Get some sleep, Riley, she said, weariness lacing her tone. And maybe consider the day shift for a while. I disconnected, leaning my head back against the seat. Sleep felt impossible. As I sat there, the city waking around me, I decided to listen to the recording one more time. Focusing on the section before the 4:44 event, I played back my earlier call with Ethan's roommate. The one saved on my own phone, not Ethan's recorder. There it was again, hiding beneath the roommate's frantic words, woven into the fabric of the call like a watermark. My own voice, a ghostly echo from the future I hadn't lived yet, whispering, "Not again." Time slips. The tremors of the 4:44 fault hadn't just scarred the warehouse. They had scarred me too. The temporal instability wasn't just out there. It was inside now. A part of me was unstuck, echoing back upon myself. Survival had come at a cost of becoming a minor paradox, a living ripple in the fabric of Nashville's already frayed timeline. 3 months later, Nashville's summer had settled in, thick and humid, draping the city in a haze that did little to soften its edges. From the outside, nothing much had changed for Jack Riley. Pipey. The office was still above the gilded spur. The neon still bled onto the street. The night shift was still my domain. But inside, everything was different. I moved through the city like a ghost myself, hyper-aware of the transitions, the flicker of streetlights, the brief pauses in conversation that felt fractionally too long, the way shadows sometimes seemed to detach themselves in my peripheral vision before snapping back into place. I found myself meticulously checking clocks, noting down minor inconsistencies with an obsessive focus that bordered on paranoia. The 3 rules, once a half-believed piece of office lore, were now absolute truths, etched onto my psyche. Especially Rule 2. The blank slate was real. The unrecorded existed, and they knew I'd seen them. The recorder from the warehouse sat locked in my desk drawer. I hadn't listened to it again. Its cold presence was enough. Ethan Vance remained officially missing, presumed victim of the river or his own unstable lifestyle. The case was closed. The case was closed. Zara and I still talked occasionally, but there was a distance now, an unspoken acknowledgement of the abyss I'd stared into. She dealt in facts and records. I now dealt in the chilling implications of their absence. I survived the 4:44 fold. My choice, my agency, had led me through it, not around it. I hadn't fled. I'd confronted the impossible, touched the void, and pulled back something tangible, even if that something was just a corrupted audio file and a fractured sense of my own temporal integrity. It was a bitter victory. I hadn't saved Ethan, but I hadn't simply run away either. I had faced the phenomenon tied to Hemlock's warnings and lived. The cost was this constant, low-level hum of wrongness, the feeling of being perpetually out of sync, the knowledge that the borders were thin and porous. One sweltering August afternoon, a thick manila envelope arrived. My private investigator license was up for renewal. Mundane paperwork, the kind that grounded you in the tedious reality of taxes and bureaucracy. I sat down, pulling out the multi-page form, the familiar scent of ink and recycled paper oddly comforting. Name, Jack Riley. Address, correct. License number, correct. Insurance verification, attached. I moved down the checklist, pen scratching against the paper. Date of birth. My breath caught in my throat. My hand froze over the form. The field wasn't empty because I hadn't filled it in yet. It was empty the way the 1976 file had been empty. A perfect, deliberate, chilling blankness. Not waiting for input. Just void. My own date of birth. Gone. Erased from the official document generated by the state system. Panic, cold and familiar, seized my chest. I looked wildly around the office, suddenly certain the walls were too close, the shadows under the desk too deep. Was this a glitch, a bureaucratic error, or had my passage through the 444 fold done more than just leave echoes on recordings? Had touching the unrecorded, interfering with their process, somehow flagged me, erased me partially from the official timeline, made me a blank slate? Then I heard it. Faint, almost subliminal, not from the street, not from the gilded spur downstairs, but seeming to emanate from the very air around me. The low, bone-deep hum, the sound of 4:44 a.m. Starting again. Here, now, in the middle of a bright, humid Nashville afternoon. And it wasn't fading. It was growing stronger. Jack faced the 4:44 fold and survived, but now carries its echo, forever checking the time. If this glitch in reality chilled you, hit like, share, and subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. See ya next time. Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight, the graveyard shift at a vast Las Vegas Walmart has 3 bizarre rules that go way beyond stocking shelves. Because after the doors lock, some things move that shouldn't. Especially the shopping carts. They say Vegas never sleeps, but trust me, after 2 a.m. inside a Walmart supercenter off the strip, it doesn't just sleep. It goes into a coma and dreams up things you don't want to see. Outside, the desert air still pulsed with the frantic energy of the casinos, a skyline built on desperate hope and gaudy neon promises. Inside, under the relentless buzzing glare of 1,000 fluorescent tubes, it was a different kind of desert, vast, sterile, and echoing with a silence that felt heavier than any noise. My name is Maya Sharma, and this graveyard shift was my penance. Vegas had chewed up my savings and spat me out, leaving me with little more than a mountain of debt. Not even mine, thanks to family, and the desperate need for any paycheck that didn't involve fake smiles or sequins. So here I was, adrift in this fluorescent limbo. Stocking shelves in aisle 7, household cleaners. The acrid chemical tang mingling unpleasantly with the lingering scent of stale popcorn from the shuttered concession stand near the entrance. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting at this hour. Aisles stretched into hazy infinity. Cathedral ceilings vanished into shadowed networks of pipes and wiring, and the polished concrete floor reflected the harsh lights like a frozen lake. My sneakers squeaked rhythmically, an embarrassingly loud sound in the unnatural quiet. Mostly, the only other noises were the hum of the lights, the drone of the industrial refrigerators in the distant grocery section, and the occasional disembodied crackle of the PA system, uttering static before falling silent again. It was my 3rd night, and I was still trying to convince myself the unease prickling my skin was just standard issue loneliness and exhaustion. Rough start, ain't it? I jumped, dropping a bottle of bleach with a clatter that echoed down the aisle. Spinning around, I saw him, Gary Miller, the senior night stalker. He was leaning against the end cap, arms crossed, a weary but vaguely amused expression on his deeply lined face. He looked like he'd been personally assembled from spare parts left over in the Nevada dust. Faded blue work vest strained over a rounded belly, thinning gray hair, eyes that seemed to have seen too many sunrises from the wrong side of a window. Just quiet, I stammered, retrieving the bleach. Quietest place in Vegas, he agreed, pushing himself upright with a soft grunt. Gets in your head if you let it. Name's Gary. Figured I ought to run you through the unofficial orientation. Management tells you the stuff they gotta, but they don't always cover the quirks of this particular location. He walked me through the basics. Emergency exits, spill cleanup protocols, the location of the perpetually broken coffee machine in the break room. His voice was low, gravelly, with a folksy drawl that felt slightly out of place against the backdrop of corporate retail. Then he paused by the yawning entrance to the main grocery thoroughfare. Right, he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Safety exits. fire extinguishers. Oh, and the carts. Almost forgot. Important, this bit. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping further, though there was no one else within earshot for aisles in any direction. Sometimes, he said, his gaze steady and unnervingly calm, you might see a shopping cart moving on its own. Standard silver ones, but no wheels. Just gliding. I must have looked as bewildered as I felt. Moving? Without wheels? Yep, rule number 1. If you find a shopping cart with no wheels but it's moving, ignore it. Just pretend you don't see it. Go back to your task. Don't stare, don't point, don't talk about it right then. Just let it be. As he spoke those last words, a faint sound drifted from several aisles over, towards the pet food section. A rhythmic scrape. Scrape! Like metal being dragged lightly across the linoleum floor. I glanced instinctively towards the sound. Gary didn't flinch, didn't pause. He kept talking, his gaze fixed on me. Now, he continued smoothly, his voice covering the faint sound. Sometimes, one of them might get curious, might follow you. Rule number 2. If it follows you through multiple aisles, lead it to aisle 13 and leave it. Don't run, just walk normal. Head for 13. Step inside, step back out. It'll stay put there. Aisle 13. I remembered seeing the gap in the overhead signs earlier. Why aisle 13? A flicker of something unreadable crossed Gary's face before settling back into weary neutrality. Just where they belong. Management keeps it off the maps, mostly uses it for clearance junk nobody wants. It's contained there. He cleared his throat. Which brings us to rule number 3, the most important one. Don't expect it to happen. Probably won't. But you gotta know. He leaned even closer, the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes on his breath. If something climbs out of it, don't run. Just close your eyes, clamp 'em shut tight, and keep 'em shut till you're sure it's gone. Count to 100 if you have to. Just don't run, and don't look. The scraping sound had stopped. The silence pressed back in, heavier than before. Gary straightened up, clapping his hands together with false finality. Right then, that's the main stuff. Folks don't always last the night shift out here, he added, almost as an afterthought, turning to head towards the back. Too quiet for some. Just follow the rules. Keep your head down. You'll be fine. Fine. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Moving carts, phantom aisles, things climbing out. This wasn't a quirk. This was madness. But looking around the vast, empty, humming expanse of the Walmart, the only other human in sight miles away at the front registers, a chilling thought occurred. Maybe the madness wasn't the rules. Maybe the madness was working here in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, Gary wasn't crazy. Maybe he was just a survivor. The next few nights passed in a blur of fluorescent light and meticulously stacked merchandise. I threw myself into the work, zoning aisles, facing products, running returns, anything to keep my mind off Gary's bizarre warnings and the hollow echo of the store after midnight. But the place itself seemed determined to unsettle me. Lights would flicker in long domino-like sequences down deserted aisles. The PA system would click on, broadcast half a syllable of a distorted voice, then fall silent again. And then the mannequins. I started taking the long way around the apparel section. Their blank plastic smiles seemed to follow me, their stiff poses subtly different each time I passed. Standard night shift jitters, I told myself. Lack of sleep, the sheer scale of the building playing tricks on my eyes. Then halfway through my shift, while restocking instant noodles in the vast grocery section, I saw it. I was kneeling, arranging packets of ramen, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At the far end of the aisle, emerging from behind a towering display of bulk tortilla chips, was a shopping cart. Standard issue silver metal, deep basket. Except it wasn't standard. It glided towards me with an unnatural smoothness, silent as a ghost. And it had no wheels, just smooth, rounded metal stumps where the wheels should have been. hovering perhaps half an inch above the polished concrete. My breath caught, beat arose in my throat. Rule 1. Ignore it. I forced my gaze back to the ramen packets, my fingers fumbling with the plastic wrap. My heart hammered against my ribs. I focused on the colorful packaging, the sodium content. Anything but the silent, impossible thing gliding down the aisle towards me. It made no sound, no scrape, no rattle, nothing. Just that terrifying, frictionless glide. I could feel its proximity. A subtle drop in temperature as it passed behind me. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, praying it would just keep going. When I dared to look again, straightening up slowly, the aisle was empty. It was gone, vanished around the end cap towards the dairy section. But the air where it had passed felt cold, disturbed. I leaned against the shelving, suddenly weak-kneed. It was real. Gary hadn't been joking or testing the new girl. Later, during our mandated 15-minute break in the soulless, linoleum-tiled break room, I approached Gary cautiously. He was reading a dog-eared paperback, sipping coffee from a stained thermos. Gary, I began, trying to sound casual. I saw, one of those carts you mentioned. The wheel-less one. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. He took a long sip of coffee before answering. Yeah? Down grocery? Yeah? Rolled past. He nodded, turning a page in his book. Happens. Long as you didn't make a fuss, didn't stare it down, it's fine. Nothing to worry about if you leave him be. He went back to his reading, effectively dismissing me and the chilling impossibility I'd witnessed. As I walked away, unconvinced and deeply unnerved, a tower of soda cans stacked near the break room door suddenly, inexplicably, toppled over, crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. Gary didn't even look up from his book. After that first sighting, I started seeing the cart more often. A fleeting glimpse down a side aisle, a silent presence rolling past the far end of the main concourse. Each time, I forced myself to obey Rule 1, turning away, focusing on my task, pretending I saw nothing. But the constant vigilance was exhausting, fraying my nerves thin. I found myself listening for that telltale silence, the specific lack of sound that heralded its approach. One night, while organizing the chaotic mess of the toy aisle, I saw it appear at the far entrance. It didn't just glide past this time. It stopped, waiting, watching. I quickly moved to the adjacent aisle, sporting goods. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it turn, the metal frame moving with that silent, fluid grace, and follow me into the aisle. Panic flared, cold and sharp. Rule 2. If it follows you through multiple aisles, lead it to aisle 13 and leave it. It was following me. Deliberately, I started walking, faster than normal, but trying not to run, back towards the central artery of the store. I risked a glance behind me. It was there, maybe 20 feet back, keeping pace, its empty basket seeming like a gaping maw. Hardware. Home decor. Stationary. It stayed with me, a silent metallic shadow. My heart hammered. Other employees. Brenda stocking magazines near the front. Marco pushing a floor buffer way down by lawn and garden. Seemed utterly oblivious. It was like the cart existed only for me. Finally, I reached the boundary between pet supplies, with its cloying smell of cedar shavings and kibble, and the dark entrance to seasonal, currently filled with sad off-season patio furniture. And between them, unmarked by any overhead sign except the small, easily missed number 13, screwed directly to the shelving unit, was the aisle Gary had pointed out. Aisle 13. It looked wrong. The lights within flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows. The air wafting out felt damp and cold, carrying a faint, unpleasant smell. Mildew, dust, and something else. Something vaguely organic and metallic, like rust and decay. The shelves were a jumble of clearance items, damaged goods, and products that seemed decades old, with the silent cart gliding inexorably closer behind me. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold into aisle 13. The cold was immediate, startling. The silence here felt different, heavier, watchful. I took 2 steps in, then quickly spun around and stepped back out, holding my breath. The wheelless cart rolled smoothly past me, into the center of the gloomy aisle, and stopped. It sat there perfectly still amidst the detritus, its empty basket facing the back wall. It looked parked. I backed away slowly, then turned and practically fled towards the loading docks, needing the noise, the activity, the presence of other people. I found Gary supervising the unloading of a truck, clipboard in hand. "Gary," I gasped, still catching my breath. The cart. It followed me. I took it to 13. He turned, and for a second I saw that strange look again. A tightening around his eyes, a deep exhale that wasn't quite relief. More like grim acceptance. "Good," he said, his voice quieter than the surrounding noise. "Good girl. That's the procedure. Did exactly right." He made a notation on his clipboard. "Best not to hang around there, though. Aisle 13. Keeps to itself." He offered no further explanation, turning back to the truck, leaving me shivering despite the warm desert night air blowing through the open bay door. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Just before I'd turned my back on aisle 13, had I seen something dark and shifting, like a pile of greasy rags, settle deeper within the cart's basket? And were those dark patches on the concrete floor just spilled oil, or something else entirely? The incident with aisle 13 solidified the rules in my mind. They weren't suggestions. They were survival mechanics in a place that operated under its own twisted logic. But it also planted a seed of unease about Gary. His relief had felt too personal, his warnings too specific. Why was he so invested in managing these phenomena? I started watching him more closely during the long, quiet hours. He had routines that seemed unrelated to standard stocking duties. He always made a point of walking down aisle 13 at the beginning and end of his shift, sometimes pausing there for long moments, his back to me, once hidden behind a tall display of dog food bags. I heard him murmuring softly, not like he was talking to himself, but like he was responding to something I couldn't hear. He also seemed to know the blind spots of the security cameras instinctively, often pausing or changing direction, just before he would have entered their view. Brenda, the chatty cashier who usually worked the self-checkout graveyard shift, wasn't much help. When I cautiously asked her about Gary or weird happenings, she just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Gary's been here forever." Total sweetheart. Just quiet. And this old building, always making noises, probably rats in the walls. She seemed determinedly oblivious, maybe willfully so, driven by annoying curiosity. I used one of the public access terminals near customer service during my break, pretending to check email. I searched for local news archives related to this specific Walmart branch. The results were frustratingly vague. A brief mention of a customer injury lawsuit years ago quickly settled. A notice about a temporary closure for electrical upgrades that seemed unusually long. Then, buried deep in a defunct local forum from the early 2000s, a single anonymous post. "Anyone else work nights at the Tropicana Walmart? Seen the cart? Aisle 13? They don't tell you everything. Get out if you can." The user account was deactivated, the thread locked. It wasn't proof, but it was a chilling echo. The cart sightings continued, maybe even increased slightly. Sometimes it would appear far down an aisle and just watch me. Other times, it would glide past with unnerving speed. I always led it back to aisle 13 if it followed, the ritual becoming numbingly familiar, but the dread never lessened. The cold, the smell, the feeling of being watched within that specific aisle seemed to intensify each time. One night, near the end of my shift, while doing a final sweep for misplaced items, I noticed something near the entrance of aisle 13, half kicked under the bottom shelf. I picked it up. It was a small, worn leather shoe, the kind a toddler might have worn, with brittle laces and cracked soles. It looked ancient, completely out of place among the modern store debris. It certainly hadn't been there the night before. A cold dread washed over me. I took it straight to Gary, who was clucking out. "Gary, look what I found. Right by 13. His reaction startled me. His usual weary calm vanished, replaced by a flash of raw anger. He snatched the shoe from my hand, his knuckles white. "I told you," he hissed, his voice low and tight. "Leave that aisle's business alone, Maya. Some things, they're offerings or memories. You don't touch them. You don't ask questions. You just do your job and stay clear." He shoved the tiny shoe deep into his pocket and stalked off towards the employee exit, leaving me standing there, the chill of aisle 13 seeming to follow me out into the gray Las Vegas dawn. Offerings? Memories? Whatever lurked in aisle 13, Gary knew far more about it than he was letting on. He wasn't just an observer. He was involved. The shift dragged on under the buzzing hum of the inescapable lights. It was Tuesday, notoriously the slowest night, and the vast store felt even more deserted than usual. Brenda had called out sick, a sudden migraine. She'd texted, leaving just me, Gary, and a single cashier holding down the fort up front, separated from us by what felt like miles of sterile linoleum. Gary seemed unusually agitated tonight, his usual weary calm replaced by a nervous energy. He kept wiping his palms on his vest, his gaze drifting constantly towards the shadowed entrance of aisle 13, visible way down the main concourse. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. Something felt wrong. I was in electronics, tidying the chaotic display of charging cables, the blank screens of oversized TVs reflecting my own tired face like dark mirrors. That's when I heard it. Not the usual silence of the wheelless cart, but a faint, intermittent scrape. Scrape, coming from the aisle entrance behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned. It was there. The cart, but it wasn't gliding silently this time. The wheel-less stump seemed to drag slightly, emitting that grating noise. And it wasn't waiting passively. It darted forward suddenly, moving with unnerving speed, positioning itself squarely in the middle of the aisle, blocking my exit. Panic surged. This was different, aggressive. I tried to edge past it along the shelving, but it mirrored my movement, scraping sideways, cutting me off. I backed away, deeper into electronics, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It advanced, matching my retreat step for step, the scraping sound echoing horribly off the polished floor and the walls of silent televisions. I ducked into a side aisle, video games, hoping to loop around. It anticipated me, appearing suddenly at the other end, blocking my path again. It was hurting me, back towards the main concourse. Yes, but away from the direction of aisle 13. It cornered me against a locked glass case full of controllers and headsets, its dented metal frame mere inches from my legs. The scraping stopped. An intense cold radiated from it, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the store's climate control. And a smell, thick, foul, like spoiled meat left too long in cheap, overheated plastic. My breath hitched. I stared into the empty basket, transfixed by horror. It wasn't empty anymore. Shadows within it writhed, coalescing. Something dark, lumpy, like a heap of sodden garbage bags mixed with hair, wire. It shifted, pulsed, and then slowly, agonizingly, a part of it began to rise. It wasn't a hand. Not really. More like a limb constructed from fused refuse. Matted clumps of something fibrous. Shards of broken plastic, dull metal, catching the fluorescent light, held together by a glistening black echo. It moved with a series of wet clicks and pops, extending over the edge of the cart towards me. Its shape was fundamentally wrong, multi-jointed, bending at impossible angles. Rule 3. If something climbs out of it, don't run. Just close your eyes. My legs screamed run. Every primal instinct shrieked to flee, to put distance between myself and this abomination born from discarded things. But Gary's dead serious tone echoed in my ears. Don't run. Don't look. Don't fight it, Maya. Gary's voice, trembling but strangely calm, came from the end of the aisle. He stood there, not moving to help, his face a mask of pale resignation and terrifying pragmatism. Just close your eyes, he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. It just needs acknowledgement, a moment of your attention. That's all. It keeps it satisfied, quieter. It's easier this way, girl. Trust me. Been doing this dance for 15 years. Keeps it fed enough so it stays put. Keeps it contained in the store. The horrific truth of his words slammed into me. He wasn't a protector. He was a zookeeper, a warden, sacrificing moments of terror, feeding this thing the fear of new hires, maybe more, to keep it appeased, locked away in its designated cage in aisle 13. My terror warred with a surge of helpless rage. The limb clicked again, reaching closer. The foul smell intensified, gagging me. Run? Defy the rule, defy Gary, and face whatever consequence that brought. Or obey? Surrender my sight, my control, and trust the insane ritual of a man who saw me as acceptable bait? The limb spasmed, inches from my face. With a choked sob, I squeezed my eyes shut, clamped them tight, knuckles white, pressing my palms against them as if to physically hold the darkness in. The world vanished, replaced by a maelstrom of other senses. The rotten chemical stench filled my nostrils, thick and suffocating. The wet clicking sound was right there beside my ear. I could feel the intense cold radiating from the entity, leaching the warmth from my skin. Was it looking at me? Examining me? I imagined teeth made of broken glass, eyes like smeared grease stains. Gary's voice continued, a low, rhythmic murmur. Was he not hungry tonight? Just needs to know we remember. Just needs to be seen, even if you ain't looking. Something brushed feather light against my cheek, cold, slick. I flinched violently but kept my eyes screwed shut, tears leaking from the corners. The clicking moved, circling me slowly. I heard a soft, wet, tearing sound, like fabric ripping, followed by a low, gurgling sigh that didn't sound remotely human. Time stretched, became meaningless. How long had I been standing here, blind, rigid with terror? Seconds, minutes, an eternity. The cold presence lingered. The foul smell pulsed around me. The clicking continued, sometimes near, sometimes further away, exploring the confines of the aisle. Gary's murmuring rose and fell. Just keep them closed. Don't look. Don't run. The rule hammered in my brain, my only anchor in the terrifying darkness. I focused on the feeling of the cheap linoleum under my sneakers, the faint vibration of the store's HVAC system. Anything mundane, anything real. Then, as suddenly as it began, the cold receded. The clicking faded, retreating down the aisle. The overpowering stench lessened, leaving only a faint, lingering trace. Gary's murmuring stopped. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the familiar steady hum of the fluorescent lights. Was it gone? Had the ritual worked? Or was this just another trick? My eyelids fluttered, desperate for light, for confirmation. But the terror held me frozen, eyes clamped shut, waiting in the suffocating dark. How long I stood there, eyes clamped shut in the echoing silence of the electronics aisle, I don't know. Eventually, the sheer exhaustion, the screaming tension in my neck and shoulders, forced my eyelids to flutter open. The first thing I saw was the flickering, fluorescent light overhead, casting harsh shadows. The second was the shopping cart. It sat perfectly still, inches from my feet, looking ordinary. Scratched metal, A slightly bent frame. Maybe a dark, greasy smudge inside the basket I hadn't noticed before. But otherwise just a cart. The monstrous limb, the shifting refuse, the entity. Gone. Vanished as if it had never been. The third thing I saw was Gary. He leaned heavily against the end cap, looking 10 years older than he had half an hour ago. His face was gray, beaded with sweat despite the chill that still lingered in the air. He held a small, grimy rag in his hand, and was meticulously wiping down the section of the cart's rim, where the limb had rested, erasing some faint, slick residue. He looked up as I met his gaze, his eyes holding a profound weariness mixed with something disturbingly like validation. "See?" he said, his voice raspy. "You did good, Maya. You did real good. Didn't run. It respects that. Gets what it needs. Just a little fear, a little attention, and goes back to 13. What? What was that?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. My legs felt like jelly. Gary sighed, stuffing the rag into his pocket. "Don't rightly know. Not exactly. Been here 15 years. Ever since they reopened after the accident. It was here before, I think. Tied to the ground, maybe. Or something that happened inside. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is keeping it happy, keeping it fed just enough." He gestured vaguely around the silent store. "These rules, they ain't for your safety, kid. Not really. They're for containment. Ignore the cart, it stays calm. Lead it back to 13. You put it back in its cage. Close your eyes when it climbs out. You give it its due without provoking it. It's a balance. A rotten, terrifying balance. But it keeps the doors open. Keeps whatever is locked in aisle 13 from getting out proper." His twisted logic washed over me, chilling me more than the entity's touch. He wasn't just a warden. He was a high priest performing necessary sacrifices. Sacrifices of moments of terror, sanity, maybe worse, from whoever was unlucky enough to draw the night shift straw. All to maintain a fragile, horrifying peace. Why haven't you told anyone? Management? The police? Gary gave a short, harsh laugh. "And say what? They know? Not the details, maybe, but they know this store is difficult. Why do you think turnover's so high? Why do you think they pay a couple bucks more an hour for nights here than anywhere else in town? They just want it handled, quietly. And that," he tapped his chest with a grimy finger, "falls to veterans like me. And now, maybe you." I felt sick, numb. I looked down the aisle towards the main concourse. The store looked exactly the same. Endless, sterile, brightly lit. Who would ever believe what happened here? Gary was right. There was no one to tell. I noticed the security camera dome high on the wall, pointed directly at our aisle. The camera? Gary followed my gaze and shrugged. Funny thing about the cameras near 13, or when that happens. Recordings get glitchy, static, sometimes whole chunks just missing. Convenient, huh? He pushed himself off the end cap. "Come on, let's get back to work. Shelves don't stock themselves." He walked away, leaving me alone in the aisle. The lingering smell of rot and burnt plastic clinging to the air like a shroud. I looked at the innocuous cart one last time, then turned and followed him, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the sudden, terrible normality. I had survived, but survival felt sickeningly like complicity. 3 months crawled by. Summer bled into fall, though in Vegas, the seasons mostly meant slight adjustments to the air conditioning. I still worked the night shift at the Tropicana Walmart. Quitting felt impossible now, partly because the rent was always due, but mostly because leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting the store, the entity, Gary, win. Or maybe, terrifyingly, it was because some part of me felt irrevocably tied to the place, marked by what I'd experienced. I moved through the nights with a detached efficiency Gary seemed to approve of. I learned the store's rhythms, Not just the delivery schedules, but the subtle shifts in atmosphere, the colder spots, the aisles where the lights buzzed with a particular frequency. I saw the wheelless cart occasionally. Ignoring it became second nature. Rule 1. Twice more, it followed me. Leading it back to the cold, waiting silence of aisle 13 felt less like panic survival and more like routine maintenance. Rule 2. My fear hadn't vanished, but it had curdled into a kind of numb, watchful dread. Rule 3 hadn't been tested again, thank God. But I knew with chilling certainty that it would be, eventually. The balance Gary spoke of required periodic feeding. Gary and I worked together in near silence most nights. An unspoken understanding existed between us. He saw I wouldn't break, wouldn't run crying to a manager who wouldn't listen anyway. I saw him as a man trapped in a horrifying, self-imposed duty, his soul eroded by years of managing the unmanageable. We were colleagues in the strangest, most isolating franchise operation in the world. One cool October night, management hired a new kid for the night shift. Fresh-faced, barely 19, name of Kevin. He had that wide-eyed look I probably wore myself just a few short months ago, thinking this was just another dead-end job. Towards the end of Kevin's first shift, Gary nodded towards him, then looked at me. "Your turn, Maya," he said quietly, his eyes conveying a weight of shared knowledge. Show him the ropes, the important bits. My heart went cold, but I nodded. Part of the job, part of the routine, part of the balance. I found Kevin struggling to stack promotional Halloween candy near the front. I walked him through the emergency exits, the fire extinguishers, the spill protocols, my voice sounding unnervingly like Gary's had that first night. Then I led him towards the main grocery thoroughfare. "Right," I said, keeping my voice level, casual. "Just a couple of store quirks you need to know about for nights." I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Quirks?" "Yeah," I said, stopping near the entrance to the pet food aisle. "Sometimes you might see a shopping cart, standard silver, but without any wheels, just gliding." Kevin frowned, seriously. "Like floating?" "Something like that," I confirmed, ignoring the sudden dryness in my mouth. Rule number 1. If you see it, just ignore it. Pretend it's not there. Don't make eye contact with the basket. As I spoke, I heard it, faintly, from down aisle 9. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Kevin glanced towards the sound, frowning. I kept my eyes locked on his, talking smoothly over the noise. "Now, sometimes, it might follow you." I continued reciting the rules, Gary's words flowing from my lips with horrifying ease. I explained Rule 2, pointing vaguely towards the unseen aisle 13. I explained Rule 3, emphasizing don't run, close your eyes, watching the color drain from Kevin's face, seeing the same dawning terror I had felt. The cycle was turning. Gary was the old guard. I was the seasoned veteran. And Kevin was the new recruit, initiated into the nightmare. My choice, my agency, had led me to survive, to adapt, to stay. And in doing so, I hadn't broken the cycle. I had become the next link in its chain. As I finished explaining Rule 3, the scraping sound stopped. A deeper silence fell over the nearby aisles. I gave Kevin what I hoped was a reassuring nod, though it felt like a betrayal. "Just follow the rules," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Keep your head down. You'll be fine." But as I turned away, leaving him pale and wide-eyed among the grinning plastic pumpkins and bags of cheap candy, I knew I was lying. Pain wasn't something the store offered after dark. All it had offered was survival, and the perpetual, soul-crushing inventory of fear. Maya survived the night shift by becoming part of its terrifying balance, forever stocking shelves alongside fear. If this story made your shift crawl, hit like, share, and subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Pleasant shopping, and watch those carts. Ever wonder what really happens in a horror museum after closing time? Welcome back to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight, guarding one in humid New Orleans reveals 3 disturbing rules, essential for surviving the night shift. Because sometimes, the exhibits don't just look lifelike. They sweat, blink, and walk the halls. In New Orleans, the air itself sweats history. A thick, clinging gumbo of jasmine, river mud, and generations of ghosts. But inside the Musée de Cauchemar, after midnight, it sweats something else entirely. Something cold, cloying, and wickedly patient. They called the museum the Nightmare House long before Dr. Moreau gave it its fancy French name. And standing here in the echoing silence of the main hall, I could understand why. The humidity wasn't just oppressive, it felt watchful. My name's Antoine Dubois, local history student, currently funding said studies by babysitting relics of the city's nightmares from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Call it morbid curiosity, call it needing the cash. Both were true. The museum, housed in a decaying garden district mansion rumored to have its own dark past, was a labyrinth of carefully curated dread. Lifelike wax figures depicted infamous local murders in gruesome detail. Glass cases held alleged voodoo artifacts that prickled the skin. And downstairs, in the grand ballroom converted for the purpose, resided a vampire exhibit so gothic and over the top it circled back around to genuinely unsettling. The only sounds were the creak and groan of the old house settling, the faint, humid hiss of the ancient air conditioning system, and occasionally, carried on the thick night air from the street outside, the distant, melancholy wail of a saxophone. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, dancing over the glass eyes of wax figures depicting the axeman's victims, illuminating dust motes, hanging suspended in the heavy air like tiny frozen souls. The prevailing smell was a complex blend: old wax, dust, the faint iron tang of fake blood used in some displays, decaying velvet ropes, and underneath it all, a sharp, almost chemical sweetness I couldn't quite place. Ah, Monsieur Dubois. Punctual. Excellent. Dr. Alistair Moreau emerged from the shadows of his office, located just off the main hall. He was a small, bird-like man with eyes that magnified behind thick spectacles, radiating an intense, almost frantic energy. He practically vibrated with passion for his collection. Ready for another night amongst our sleeping beauties. As ready as I'll ever be, Doctor, I replied, taking the heavy ring of keys he offered. Splendid, splendid, splendid. Now, a quick refresher on our particular protocols. Routine, you understand, but vital for the preservation of these delicate pieces, and for ensuring a smooth, uneventful shift. He produced a small laminated card from his tweed jacket pocket. Rule of the first: if the wax figures begin to sweat, any of them, mind you, but pay particular attention to the plague tableau and Madame Laurie's attic scene, you are to activate the environmental lockdown via the main security panel immediately. Do not investigate, do not delay. Lockdown first, then radio me. He tapped the card. Rule the second: during your cleaning rounds, my duties included a light mopping of the main thoroughfares. If you happen to notice one of the figures, blink. You simply continue your work. Mop around it. Do not stop, do not react. Give it space. Understood? I nodded, swallowing. Blink. Atmospheric pressure, tricks of the light, the mind plays games in here. He waved a dismissive hand, though his eyes remained intense behind the lenses. Just mop around it. And finally, rule the third: if, upon your rounds, you find a vampire exhibit downstairs, empty, specifically the central coffin display. If the occupant is not present, you are to remain where you are, provided you are in a well-lit area. This main hall, the security office by the entrance. Stay in the light. Radio for assistance. But stay put until myself or emergency services arrive. Do not enter the exhibit area. Do not search. He peered at me, ensuring I understood the gravity. These procedures are paramount, Antoine, non-negotiable, for the museum's integrity and yours. Just then, the heavy front doors opened, and Simone Thibodeau, who handled the late evening cleaning shift, slipped out, pulling her hoodie up against the night. She gave me a quick, tired nod, her dark eyes lingering on Moreau for a fraction of a second before flicking back to me. "Keep the lights bright tonight, Chair," she murmured, almost too low to hear, before disappearing into the misty New Orleans night. A strange comment, but Moreau didn't seem to register it. "Well then," Moreau chirped, seemingly satisfied with my understanding of the rules. "Enjoy the quiet. Call if anything unusual arises." He retreated back into his office, the door clicking softly shut. "Enjoy the quiet, right?" I started my first round, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. As I passed the Pirates of the Barataria exhibit, my light lingered on the grizzled face of Jean Lafitte's most notorious lieutenant, depicted hanging from a crude gallows. For a heartbeat, I could have sworn his glassy, painted eyes weren't staring blankly ahead, but had shifted, ever so slightly, to watch me pass. I blinked, shook my head. Tricks of the light, like the doctor said. Just tricks of the light and the heavy, sweating history hanging in the air. But the back of my neck prickled anyway. The night was young, and the museum felt awake. My first few nights were a masterclass in psychological suggestion. Every creak of the ancient floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every draft felt like cold breath on my neck. The glass eyes of the wax figures seemed to track my flashlight beam with unnerving focus. I catalogued the horrors rationally. The gruesome Lellery torture scene, the blank-eyed stares of pirate ghosts, the chillingly accurate recreation of a notorious Storyville crime scene. Knowing they were wax and plaster didn't stop the instinctive crawl of unease up my spine. This place felt wrong, especially when the last echoes of Bourbon Street faded outside. Then came the first real test. It was maybe 2 a.m., the deadest hour. I was doing my rounds near the back, where the exhibits got older, darker. I turned a corner into the plague doctor's visit tableau, a dimly lit scene depicting a beak-masked physician leaning over a sweat-drenched waxen patient in a filthy bed, surrounded by grieving family members frozen in despair. Except tonight, the despair felt horribly current. All the figures, doctor, patient, family, were glistening with moisture, not condensation. This was thick, oily sweat, beading on their foreheads, running in rivulets down their cold, waxen cheeks. The air here was freezing, far colder than elsewhere in the museum, and carried a cloying, sickly sweet aroma, like gardenias dipped in formaldehyde. Rule 1. If the wax figures begin to sweat, activate lockdown protocol. My hand trembled as I raised the radio. "Dr. Moreau, this is Antoine. We have, sweating figures in the plague, Dr. Tableau." His voice crackled back instantly, sharp with static and something else. "Anxiety? Understood, Antoine. Activate an environmental lockdown. Section B. Immediately. Confirm activation." Heart pounding, I raced to the nearest security panel, punched in the code Moreau had drilled into me, and slammed the large red button labeled Lockdown B. Heavy metal shutters began to descend with loud clangs over the windows and archways leading to that section, isolating it. A loud hum signaled the specialized climate control kicking in. "Lockdown B activated, Doctor," I confirmed into the radio. "Excellent. Stay put. I am en route." Moreau arrived minutes later, looking flustered, his tweed jacket askew. He hurried past me without a word, rushing into the sealed-off tableau area, armed with a bag full of swabs, vials, and a device that looked like a modified Geiger counter. He spent 10 minutes in there, the strange device emitting clicks and whirs. When he emerged, wiping his brow with actual normal sweat, his agitated manner was replaced by brisk dismissal. A severe humidity spike localized, he declared, avoiding my eyes. These old buildings, you know. The lockdown cycle should stabilize the environment. You may resume your rounds, Antoine. Nothing to be alarmed about. He bustled away, clutching his bag of samples. Nothing to be alarmed about. The figures had looked like they were weeping, and just before the final shutter slammed down, I could have sworn I heard a faint, choked sob echo from within the tableau. Later, my radio crackled again. It was Simone's voice, lower, more cautious than Moreau's. Antoine? You okay? You okay? Heard lockdown B went active. Was it the plague scene? Yeah, I admitted, unnerved by her knowing tone. How did you? Happens sometimes, she cut in quickly, especially when the old man's been working late on his projects. He gets real protective about that one. Lost his little girl to a fever, back when Yellow Jack hit hard one summer. Sad story. A pause. Just maybe don't push him for answers when those ones act up. The radio clicked off, leaving me with more questions and a growing sense of dread about just what Dr. Moreau was preserving here. The sweating incident left me rattled. I started paying more attention, not just to the exhibits, but to the museum itself, to Moreau. His official hours ended long before mine began. Yet I occasionally heard faint sounds from his locked workshop deep in the administrative wing late at night. And Simone's warning lingered. Why would Moreau get protective over that specific tableau? Routine dictated I mop the main walkways each night. It was mindless work, a way to pass the hours. One night, I was working near the large, elaborate exhibit dedicated to Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Her wax figure was unnervingly lifelike, draped in colorful fabrics, holding gris-gris bags, her dark eyes seeming to hold ancient secrets. As I pushed the damp mop in smooth arcs across the polished floor, my gaze flickered over her face, and she blinked. Not a trick of the light, not a flicker from my flashlight. A slow, deliberate closing and opening of both eyelids. The glass eyes seemed to focus directly on me for a split second, before returning to their blank stare. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, the mop handle clattering against a display case. Rule 2. If one of them blinks while you clean the floor, mop around it. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt wrong, violating some fundamental law of reality. But the rule was specific. Don't react. Don't stop. Mop around it. With trembling hands, I resumed mopping, carefully tracing a wide berth around the spot directly in front of the voodoo queen. Acutely aware of her stillness, the feeling of her painted gaze fixed on my back. The silence in the hall seemed immense, charged. The encounter spurred me to action. During my next designated break, I used the ancient computer in the security office, bypassing the museum's public website and delving into archived Times-Picayune articles and city records. Simone's comment about Moreau's daughter stuck with me. Camille Moreau. Date Agate 10. Sudden illness officially listed as yellow fever, though the date seemed slightly off for the last major outbreak. Moreau, already a respected historian, had thrown himself into acquiring artifacts for the museum shortly after, transforming it into the Musée des Cauchemars. There were whispers, even back then, about his unhealthy obsession with preservation. Simone found me hunched over the screen, scrolling through grainy microfiche scans. Digging up ghosts, Antoine? She asked quietly, leaning against the doorframe. I jumped, minimizing the screen guiltily. Just curious about the museum's history. She sighed, walking over and peering at the screen. Moreau's girl? Yeah, tragic. But this place, it was wrong long before Moreau bought it. My grandmère used to say this land was never properly blessed after they moved that old yellow fever cemetery. Said the ground itself holds on to pain, makes echoes of things. She lowered her voice. And Moreau, he spends too much time here. Late nights. Talking to things that ain't supposed to talk back. Be careful what ghosts you go chasing, Chair. Especially his. Later, as I finished mopping near the Marie Laveau exhibit, I noticed it. A single, glistening droplet clinging to the figure's high cheekbone, catching the light like a diamond. Below it, on the floor, I had just mopped. A small, damp spot. A small, damp spot was already reforming. Exactly where a tear would have fallen, and tucked partially under the edge of the exhibit's platform. Something caught my eye. A small, intricately carved piece of bone, tied with faded red thread. It looked like a voodoo charm, but older, cruder than the replicas displayed. I picked it up. It felt strangely cold. This wasn't part of the exhibit. It felt like something left behind, or something deliberately placed. The atmosphere in the museum grew heavier in the following nights. Lights flickered more erratically. I'd hear faint whispers that seemed to dissipate the moment I tried to focus on them, sounding like distorted fragments of French or maybe something older. Cold spots drifted through locked rooms, raising the hair on my arms. I doubled my rounds, my flashlight beam constantly probing the shadows. The bone charm tucked safely, or perhaps foolishly, into my pocket. Then came the night Rule 3 became terrifyingly relevant. My route always ended downstairs in the grand ballroom that housed the creatures of the night exhibit, dominated by the lavish vampire display. Ornate coffin, crimson velvet lining. Wax figure of a Nosferatu-like creature slumbering peacefully within. Except tonight, the piece was shattered. I reached the bottom of the grand staircase, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom towards the exhibit. The heavy, carved lid of the central coffin was thrown wide open, and the coffin was empty. The slumbering vampire figure was gone. If the vampire exhibit is empty, stay where the light is. Ice flooded my veins. Gone? A 6-foot wax figure doesn't just vanish. Panic clawed at my throat. The nearest significant light was back up the staircase in the main rotunda. I didn't hesitate. I turned and scrambled back up the stairs, not daring to look too deeply into the shadowed corners of the ballroom below. Safely under the bright, if occasionally buzzing, chandelier of the rotunda, I fumbled for my radio. Simone, Dr. Moreau. This is Antoine. Code Rule 3. Vampire exhibit is empty. Repeat, the coffin is empty. Silence. Then Simone's voice crackled back, tight with undisguised fear. Merd. Antoine. Where are you? Okay. Where are you? Rotunda. Under the main lights. Good. Good. Stay there. Don't move, you hear. Don't go looking for it. Is Moreau with you? No. He's not answering. Sacre Bleu. Listen, Antoine. That count figure. Moreau uses it sometimes for his experiments, his special projects. Says it's a good conductor. Sometimes it gets active, moves. You gotta stay in the light till Moreau gets it back. Just as she spoke, the grand chandelier above me flickered violently, plunging the rotunda into momentary darkness before buzzing back to life. From the top of the stairs leading down to the ballroom, I heard it. A soft, deliberate shuffling sound, followed by a low, dry chuckle that echoed horribly in the vast space. Something was down there. Something that wasn't wax anymore. Moreau still wasn't answering his radio. Simone's warning confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just random haunting. Moreau was actively involved, losing control. Waiting here felt like waiting for slaughter. Simone said Moreau used it. Maybe he could stop it. Or maybe he was the cause. Either way, I had to find him. Gripping my heavy flashlight like a weapon, I took a steadying breath. Moreau's workshop was in the old administrative wing, usually kept locked. If he was conducting an experiment, he'd be there. Just as I took a step towards the corridor leading to that wing, the ancient grandfather clock standing near the entrance chimed. Not the hourly chime. It bonged slowly, resonantly, 13 times. The sound hammered through the silence. As the last chime faded, I saw a flicker of movement at the far end of the rotunda, near the darkened archway leading towards the oldest exhibits. A shadow impossibly tall and thin detached itself from the deeper darkness and darted across the marble floor before vanishing again. It was loose, and it was hunting. Fear is cold, but adrenaline is hot. Ignoring the rational part of my brain screaming at me to stay in the relative safety of the rotunda's light, I plunged into the darkened corridor, leading towards the administrative wing. Flashlight beam cutting a nervous path ahead. The shuffling sounds from the ballroom behind me seemed to fade, replaced by the frantic pounding of my own heart and the creak of floorboards under my feet. Rule 3 was broken. Something was out, and I wasn't staying put. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every glint of glass from a display case looked like watching eyes. The door to Moreau's private workshop, usually locked tight, stood slightly ajar. Muted light spilled from within, along with the distinct, cloying scent of formaldehyde and those sickly sweet magnolias, stronger than ever. I could hear Moreau's voice, not frantic now, but low, intense, pleading. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was chaos, a disturbing fusion of meticulous historical archiving and mad science. Books on necromancy lay open beside preservation manuals. Antique surgical tools were laid out near buzzing electrical coils. Strange diagrams combining anatomical sketches with what looked like astrological charts were pinned to the walls. And in the center, beneath a spotlight jury-rigged from an old exhibit lamp, stood a wax figure I'd never seen displayed. A young girl with startlingly lifelike features, dressed in turn-of-the-century clothing. Wires snacked from under her dress, connecting to a humming, sparking generator cobbled together from museum artifacts and modern tech. This had to be Camille. Moreau stood before her, hands outstretched, holding a pulsing amulet-like object. The bone charm I'd found near Marie Laveau's exhibit felt like a cheap imitation compared to this artifact. He hadn't heard me enter, completely consumed by his ritual. "Come back, ma petite," he whispered, his voice thick with desperate longing. "Just a spark. Feel the energy. It's all here for you. Papa's here, Dr. Moreau." My voice cracked, louder than I intended. He spun around, startled, eyes wild behind his spectacles. The artifact pulsed brighter in his hand. "Antoine, you shouldn't be here. This is delicate. Doctor, the vampire figure is gone. The rules. The rules," he spat, his face contorting with a sudden, surprising fury. "The rules are crude measures, necessary perhaps to manage the ambient potential. The sweating, the blinking, those are just uncontrolled overflows. Side effects." He gestured frantically towards the figure of Camille. "But this is focus. This is purpose. Don't you understand? This museum isn't just dead history. It's brimming with residual energy, the pain, the fear, the passions of everyone connected to these objects. This ground. It lingers. It can be channeled." "Channeled for what, Doctor?" I demanded, stepping further into the room, my flashlight beam catching the unsettlingly realistic glass eyes of the Camille figure. His face softened, crumpling with a grief so profound it was terrifying. "To bring her back," he whispered, tears tracing paths through the dust on his cheeks. "My Camille, gone too soon. But her essence, I know it can be drawn back, anchored." This figure, molded from her death mask. The artifacts charged with emotional resonance. The energy spikes. He raised the pulsing artifact again. Tonight the connection is strong." His confession hung in the air, thick and horrifying. This wasn't curation. It was necromancy fueled by heartbreak. As if summoned by his words, The entire museum seemed to groan in protest. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power stuttered violently, plunging the workshop into a strobe-lit nightmare. Rule 3 threatened. Simultaneously, a piercing alarm began to shriek through the building, the environmental lockdown system, triggering automatically across all sections. Figures everywhere must be sweating. Rule 1 breach. From the hallway came the distinct, sharp click, click, click of multiple wax eyelids snapping open in unison. Rule 2 violated en masse. Moreau barely seemed to notice the alarms. Yes, the energy, he cried, turning back to the Camille figure. It's working. But the workshop door, which I'd left partially open, slammed fully open with violent force. Framed in the doorway, cast in the flickering emergency lights, stood the vampire figure. It wasn't waxen now. It seemed taller, thinner, composed of shifting shadows and negative space. Its form barely containing a terrible, lightless energy. Its eyes glowed with a dull, malevolent red light. It hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across tombstone granite. Magnificent. Moreau breathed, seemingly oblivious to the direct threat. The conduit is fully active. He held the artifact towards the creature. Come, give your energy to Camille. The creature hissed again and lunged, not towards the figure, but towards Moreau. Look out, I yelled, shoving Moreau aside just as a shadowy claw swiped through the air where he'd been standing. We both stumbled back, Moreau dropping the artifact, which clattered across the floor, its light dimming slightly. Chaos erupted. The Camille figure on the table began to twitch, its head lolling unnaturally, a low moan escaping its waxen lips. From the hallway, I heard shuffling, groaning. Other wax figures, animated by the surge, were moving. The vampire entity advanced into the room, its shadowy form solidifying slightly, taking on features nightmarishly cobbled from the museum's darkest exhibits. Suddenly, Simone's voice yelled from the hallway, Antoine! Moreau! Get out! They're all moving. She appeared briefly at the doorway, face stark white with terror, wielding a heavy antique fire extinguisher like a club, before being forced back by a lurching, sweating figure from the lorry tableau. Trapped, Moreau was scrabbling on the floor for the artifact. The vampire entity stalked towards us, its red eyes fixed on the pulsing energy source. The Camille figure was sitting up now, its movements jerky, puppet-like, its glass eyes wide and staring. The air crackled, thick with the sweet chemical smell and the ozone tang of raw power. My flashlight beam caught the glint of something sharp in the vampire entity's shadowy hand. Not a wax prop, but what looked chillingly like one of the genuine, rusty surgical tools from the Plague Doctor display. This wasn't just contained energy anymore. Moreau, in his grief, had given it focus, intention, and now it seemed a weapon. The chaos in Moreau's workshop reached a fever pitch. The vampire entity lunged, shadowy claws extended, not towards Moreau scrambling for the artifact, but towards the twitching, moaning figure of Camille on the table. Its red eyes burned with a possessive hunger. Moreau screamed, "No, not her," and threw himself in its path. Simultaneously, Simone burst back through the doorway, hefting the heavy brass fire extinguisher. "Antoine, the generator," she yelled, pointing towards the sparking machine powering the Camille figure. Whether through instinct or Simone's desperate cry, I understood. The figure wasn't Camille. It was an anchor, a vessel Moreau had prepared, and the entity, drawn by the power surge, intended to claim it, while the vampire entity grappled monstrously with the surprisingly strong Dr. Moreau. I lunged past them, dodging a lurching wax figure that stumbled into the room. I swung my heavy maglite flashlight like a bat, aiming for the main console of the jury-rigged generator. Sparks flew as metal impacted delicate wiring. The machine sputtered, coughed thick, acrid smoke, and died with a final pathetic whine. The effect was instantaneous. The low hum of power ceased. The Camilla figure slumped back onto the table, suddenly inert, just painted wax and wire again. The vampire entity shrieked, a sound like tearing silk and shattering glass, as if its connection were severed. It recoiled, its shadowy form flickering violently. The red light in its eyes dimmed. Moreau, momentarily freed, finally grasped the artifact from the floor, holding it aloft. "Begone. Back to the shadows," he croaked, his voice thin. The entity hissed again, swatting Moreau hard against the wall where he slumped, stunned, but his form seemed less substantial now, flickering rapidly, with a final, frustrated screech that echoed with centuries of rage. It dissolved, flowing like smoke, back out the doorway and dissipating into the chaotic darkness of the museum halls. Just as the first hint of gray dawn began to filter through the high, grimy windows, silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens, responding to the museum-wide alarms. The emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows. The other animated figures in the hallway froze mid-lurch, becoming lifeless wax once more. Simone cautiously entered the workshop, extinguisher held ready, her face pale but resolute. Moreau was conscious but barely, bleeding from a cut on his head, clutching the now dim artifact to his chest, staring blankly at the inert Camille figure. He looked utterly broken, his grand obsession shattered. "We need to go," Simone urged, grabbing my arm. "Police gonna be here any second. Let them find him like this." We didn't wait. We navigated back through the suddenly still museum. The lockdown shutters still descended, past sweating figures now merely damp, past blinking figures now staring blankly. The horror felt suspended, paused rather than ended. The police, when they finally breached the lockdown, found a scene they couldn't comprehend. A rambling, injured old curator, a trashed workshop filled with bizarre equipment, strange residues, and stories of walking wax figures. Moreau was taken to a psychiatric ward. The official report mentioned a gas leak causing hallucinations, faulty wiring, vandalism by person or persons unknown. The museum was closed indefinitely, sealed behind police tape and whispered rumors. Simone and I gave vague statements about alarms and finding the curator injured, the bone-deep chill of the night ensuring we kept the impossible truth to ourselves. Who would believe us anyway? As they led Moreau away, I glanced back at the workshop. The Camille figure lay still, but under the harsh glare of a police flashlight, I could have sworn I saw a single, perfect tear resting on its cold wax cheek. Months later, New Orleans was settling back into its sultry rhythm. Autumn here doesn't bring crisp air, just slightly less suffocating humidity and the promise of carnival season stirring in the distance. I was back trying to focus on my history studies, but the texts felt dry, sanitized. The real history, the kind that breathed and bled and lingered, felt locked away behind the boarded-up doors of the Musée de Cauchemars. I couldn't shake the place. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Flickering lights, the sickly sweet smell of decay, glass eyes blinking in the dark. During the day, the familiar streets of the French Quarter seemed different, charged with a hidden energy I hadn't noticed before. Every antique shop window seemed to hold watching eyes. Every shadowed alleyway felt like a potential portal. Simone and I met sometimes for coffee in a quiet cafe far from the Garden District. We didn't talk much about that night, not directly, but there was a shared understanding, a grim bond forged in terror. She'd heard Moreau was unresponsive in the hospital, lost in his own world. The museum remained closed, tangled in legal battles between the city and Moreau's distant relatives. The official story held: gas leak, unstable curator. The public memory, like the city itself, preferred its ghosts romanticized, not rampaging. I often found myself walking near the museum late at night, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress. The mansion looked even more decrepit now. Paint peeling, garden overgrown, police tape fluttering like funeral ribbons in the damp breeze. It looked like a tomb, which I suppose it was. One particularly humid night, the air thick as velvet, I stood across the street, hidden by the deep shadows of an ancient oak. The streetlights cast a hazy glow on the boarded-up facade. Had I really stopped Moreau? Or just interrupted him? Had smashing the generator merely severed a temporary link? Or had it contained the restless energy I'd tried to harness? Was the museum's breath still in there, waiting, accumulating, perhaps finding new anchors in the dust and decay? My survival felt less like a victory and more like a temporary truce. My choices that night, confronting Moreau, breaking his machine, perhaps saving Simone, surviving myself, they mattered, but they hadn't erased the fundamental wrongness of the place. Lost in thought, I almost missed it. A faint light flickered on, deep within the second floor of the sealed museum. Not an emergency light, but a softer, warmer glow, like a single candle, had been lit in the oppressive darkness. I froze, straining my eyes, heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The light illuminated one of the tall, arched windows, dust motes dancing in its weak beam, and framed within that window, partially obscured by grime and shadows, stood a figure. Still, pale, unnervingly lifelike. The figure of the young girl, Camille. Her head was tilted slightly, as if listening. Then, just before the light abruptly extinguished, plunging the window back into blackness, I saw it. Or perhaps I only imagined I saw it. A slow, deliberate blink of those glassy, lifelike eyes. A silent acknowledgement across the humid, haunted night. I backed away slowly. The cold sweat breaking out on my skin wasn't just from the New Orleans humidity anymore. The museum wasn't sleeping. It was waiting. And maybe, just maybe, something inside was waiting specifically for me. The history here wasn't dead. It was just dreaming. And I now knew firsthand how sharp its teeth were when it woke. Antoine survived Moreau's horrifying experiment, but the museum's chilling gaze lingers in the New Orleans night. If this dark exhibit crept you out, hit like, share, and subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules. Watch where you shine that flashlight.